What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto wasn't special? Until he became the god of all Kekkei Genkai. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description box to original creator of this beautiful creation. Hyuga Compound. 10:34 p.m. Hyuga Hinata stood in horror as she watched her cousin stand in front of the elders. It seemed like the entire Hyuga head family was there to see his punishment. For the 6-year-old girl, the whole thing was overwhelming. She remembered the first time she saw the cage bird seal activate when she was 3. It had frightened her so much that sometimes she would still have nightmares about it. It wasn't like Neji had really done anything wrong, Hinata found herself thinking. He had only forgotten to address her as Hinata-sama. But it seemed that the elders would take any excuse to remind the branch family of what the head family was capable of. Neji stood defiantly in front of the elders, headed by Hyuga Hiyashi, Hinata's father. His white eyes displayed only one emotion, hatred. "You know the punishment for insubordination," Hiyashi was saying coldly, "and you have seen it before." Hinata's stomach clenched. Neji's eyes found Hinata's and held them. She could feel the malice in his gaze, yet for some reason, she wasn't able to return it. Her father would have told her she was weak. He would have been angry that she looked at him with sadness, but it was impossible for her not to. Neji was the closest thing Hinata had to a brother, and strangely enough, he was the only one who truly understood the emotions she felt. That was why she couldn't hate him. Because he had felt the hopeless, frustrated anger that she had all her life. The anger that sometimes reduced Hinata to tears when she was alone after a training session had gone badly. He was probably the only one who had known her feelings when she had been shuffled aside in favor of Hanabi, who now stood at her father's side with an unreadable face. She looked sadly at Neji, wishing that she wasn't such a failure. Maybe if she was strong, like she was supposed to be, she could stop this madness. "Have you anything to say before the seal activates?" Hiyashi asked. "I have nothing to say to you, murderer." Neji spat. Hiyashi's eyes narrowed, and Neji crumpled to the ground screaming and twitching. Hinata felt bile rising in her throat. This was just like the time when she was 3, and she had watched Neji's father writhing on the ground in pain. She felt hot tears coming to her eyes as she watched. Hinata didn't have to look around to know that the looks on the others' faces were cold, hard, and completely uncaring. Her hands clenched into fists and she turned her head away. Hinata knew she was weak, and she knew that she should feel satisfaction that her cousin was getting punished for his insubordination. She knew that Hanabi would never have felt the way that she did, and her father would look down on her further if she tried to stop him. She was too weak to be a true member of the head family. She remained in-branded simply because she would be more useless as a branch family member. She would be too weak to accept that way of life anymore than the one she had been born into. But was it so bad to be weak? The thought sprang up in Hinata's mind before she could repress it. Was it so bad to be compassionate? Was it so wrong to be kind? "No," Hinata whispered, so quietly that no one heard it, "I can't believe it is." She remembered when, before her father had given up on her, she had been asked a question in her training. What would you do with power? Hinata had been unable to answer that question, but Hanabi, who had been there at the time, had piped up that she would crush everyone who was her enemy. Her father had seemed pleased with the younger sibling's remark, and angry at his oldest daughter's thoughtful silence. What would you do with power? Now the question had come back to her. Before, Hinata hadn't known what to think. She hadn't been allowed to have her own opinions, but she had never been able to simply parrot her father's thoughts. All she had felt was confusion and a frustrated feeling that churned in her stomach. Now, the words seemed to have more weight than they had even had then. As she looked at her cousin, who was starting to twitch slightly, her answer came. "I would stop this. I would change the Hyuga clan. I would help people who needed it." The world stopped. Hinata felt a gentle warmth in her eyes and closed them for a moment. When she opened them, the whole room looked different. She had activated the Byakugan before, and this was similar, but something about it was completely different. Hinata could not only see the chakra system of her family as well as nearly everything around her. She could see a stream of chakra that her father was forcing into Neji's seal as well as the chakra that it was forcing itself into his brain. She could also see that the seal was only a physical sign of where an invisible layer of chakra remained. It was strange how she hadn't seen that before. Hinata wasn't even thinking as she walked forwards. She didn't even notice the looks of surprise and shock that she was receiving from her family. Hinata felt almost like she was watching other person as she calmly touched the stream of chakra. At her touch, the chakra dispersed, and Neji stopped twitching. Hinata turned to her cousin and knelt down in front of him. Carefully, she traced the seal on his forehead with her finger. As she touched it, the seal vanished, and the layer of chakra began to disappear as well. "What are you doing?" Hiyashi Hyuga's voice seemed weaker than before. Hinata looked up at her father, not really understanding why he was looking at her with such shock and fear. Healing him, Hinata said, "The seal is bad. It's killing him." "What did you do?" one of the Hyuga cried out. "I took it off," Hinata said. "I don't want to see him hurt anymore." The silence in the room was complete until Hiyashi stepped forward. "You are not my daughter," he spat. "You have not only created a perversion of the family's Byakugan, but you have broken our most sacred tradition. You're fortunate I don't kill you where you stand, but I see that you are too weak to be a threat. Get out of my sight. Since you care so much for the boy, he shall accompany you in banishment. I have no use for a coward who cannot understand his position. You are both forbidden to bear the name Hyuga, and should I or anyone see you near the Hyuga complex, we will kill you. You have until midnight to gather to leave." Hinata stood trembling at the words of the man who had been her father. Tears sprang into her eyes as her sight returned to normal. She sat there, in shock while the rest of her former family left one by one, occasionally casting glances her way. A touch at her elbow brought Hinata back to her senses. She looked around to see Neji, awake, shockingly, and looking at her with an emotion that she didn't recognize. "Why?" was all he said, but his voice lacked the usual hatred. "I couldn't stand to see it anymore." Hinata mumbled, "I wanted to stop it." Aye. Neji shakily stood up and helped Hinata stand. It was the beginning of a new world. Uchiha District 10:39 p.m. Uchiha Sasuke was not a happy boy. It wasn't fair that everything he did was either ignored or belittled or told some story about something Itachi had done when he was Sasuke's age. It wasn't that he hated his older brother. It was impossible to hate the one person who acknowledged his existence, but he was so tired of having to compete with him. His mother and father barely seemed to know that they had another son. Every conversation was about Itachi. Itachi's missions, Itachi's successes, Itachi. Sasuke sat on his bed and listened to the mumbles of the conversation from down the hall. His parents had given him something to eat early and sent him to his room while they entertained their guests. Sasuke was old enough to sit with company. Itachi had been shown off to guests since he had been 3. Why was Sasuke pushed off into a corner all the time? Itachi was still out on his Anbu duties, and even if he were there, he would have just been roped into a conversation with their parents and guests. Sasuke stood up and looked out the window. Rage coursed through him as he heard the sound of the conversation down the hall. He had often eavesdropped on the conversations, and heard what they said about him. "Don't you have another son, Uchiha-san?" "Yes, but he is of no importance." That had been said last night, and even now the words hurt as much as they had when they were said. Sasuke's anger was reaching its peak as he made his final decision. "If you don't want me," Sasuke muttered, "if I'm that unimportant, so insignificant, then I won't trouble you anymore." The action was mostly out of anger and desperation to be noticed. There was malice in it as well, and a desire to hurt his parents, but he hadn't thought out all the reasons. It was an act of passion, but it was carried out in a completely emotionless way. Sasuke began to pack his weapons, some clothes, and money into a small backpack. He didn't have any plans yet on where he was going or what he was going to do, but he knew one thing. Uchiha Sasuke was running away. Unknown to him, there was a young man in Anbu uniform that was watching him slip out the window. "Foolish Otuto, what are you doing?" It was the beginning of a new life. Root Base. 10:22 p.m. Sai had been taught well. Technically, his name wasn't even Sai. That was just a name that, privately, he liked the sound of, and he had read that people needed to have names. He had chosen Sai on a whim, and no matter what, he had gotten into the habit of thinking of himself as Sai. It was as simple as that. In all other regards, Sai was a near-perfect example of a root ninja. He never showed his emotions or thoughts about anything, and this time was no exception. He had returned from a mission only to be told that his brother was dead from the illness he had had for a while. Sai had accepted the news without a flinch, and had been allowed to return to his room. Sai's room was as practical as it was possible to be. The only things other than the blank white walls were a bed and a small desk. Sai sat down at his desk quietly. For some reason the death of his brother made a strange feeling rise up in his chest. He took out the small picture book that he had with him. It was an unfinished gift to his brother, but now he wasn't sure what he had been about to draw into the final page. It was strange, he had never really had that much time with his brother, and technically, he wasn't really his brother, just another ninja who had been kind to him. The two of them were always separately training. Yet, somehow for all his root training, Sai could feel a strange hollowness in his stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. He couldn't help the image of his brother that appeared before his eyes, or the dull feeling that Sai would never see him again. Sai had never questioned anything that he was told before, but now, something was stirring in him. He had never thought anything against Danzo, but now, thoughts were rising up, and one was the most defined. It's his fault. Sai stared at the wall in total silence, then stood up. He needed to clear his head. He would take a walk. It was the beginning of a new way of thinking. Konoha Playground. 10:42 p.m. Uzumaki Naruto liked to go to the playground after dark. For one thing, it was kind of fun to play at night, since there was a forbidden element to it. For another thing, he didn't have to feel left out when there was no one playing in groups. Naruto sat on one of the swings, and looked up at the sky. Actually, he was fairly content to be like this. In his opinion, it was useless to cry about being alone all the time, and you really couldn't miss what you never had to begin with. Besides, when he became Hokage, everything would change. Naruto smiled brightly at the thought. Yeah, I'll definitely become Hokage. He yelled for no reason. It was a habit of his. Naruto didn't like silence. He had lived in it way too long, so he would break, no shatter, silence if it became too oppressive. That was where his habit of randomly yelling things for no reason came from. There was nothing more to it. Something moved in some bushes to Naruto's right, and he jumped off the swing. It was probably just the local feudal lord's wife's cat again. That thing had a long history of running away. Maybe if Naruto caught it, he would be acknowledged as a full ninja and not have to bother with the academy anymore. Just in case it was something else, Naruto picked up a stick that was lying on the ground. He edged close to the bush and gently thrust the stick into the bush. "Come here, kitty," Naruto said in a sing-song voice, "I'm just gonna take you home." "Go away." Naruto stopped. The last time he had checked, cats didn't talk. Naruto had never been known to do anything that anyone asked of him, unless it was Iruka-sensei or Old Man Hokage, and he was curious. He poked through the bushes and blinked at the girl curled up in the bushes. "Hi," Naruto said cheerfully, "I'm Uzumaki Naruto, and I'm gonna be Hokage." The girl had short pink hair that was covering most of her face. One look at her told Naruto that she had been crying. She was hiccuping slightly, and the green eyes that looked up at him were red-rimmed and somewhat unfocused. She sniffled a little and wiped her eyes. Finally, she looked up at him with fear. "What's your name?" Naruto asked, with a huge smile that showed off the whisker-shaped marks on his cheeks in full glory. "Why are you crying? Did your parents forget to come get you? Do you have parents? Is your hair real, or did someone get food coloring in it?" The girl stuttered, "Leave me alone, please. I can't help my forehead being big." Naruto looked at her forehead with interest. It looked like a forehead. "It's not big," Naruto said, a little disappointed. He had been imagining a forehead the size of Hokage Mountain. "It's not," the girl said, sounding confused, "but everyone says so." "It's not big," Naruto said, nodding to confirm his statement. "I'm Haruno Sakura," Sakura said softly. Naruto was thrilled. He had never really had much of a conversation with anyone before. Mostly he just ran around and harassed the other kids until they let him into their game, but they didn't really like him that well. Naruto knew it, but hoped that he would eventually grow on them. Now, he was talking to another kid like it was normal. Sakura straightened up from her ball and smiled shyly at Naruto, who grinned back. The sound of someone talking softly brought both children out of whatever thoughts they were having. It sounded like someone their age, maybe a little older, and it was coming closer. After a while, Naruto could hear what the person was saying. "An apartment for the both of us. I'm not even sure if I'll be able to stay in the academy now. I never really asked who was paying for it." The voice was definitely male. "I think that it's standardized." I once heard Fa Hiyashi-sama saying that it was a waste to spend money and time on children who will never be ninja, a soft, girl's voice said. She apparently had a bit of a stuttering problem. We'll have to speak to the Hokage. I know that he cannot intervene in clan matters, but he may able to help. Yeah, Naruto broke in loudly when he knew the two could hear him. The old man'll help you. He saw with interest that it was Hyuga Hinata, a shy girl he knew in the academy who always blushed when she saw him, and Hyuga Neji, a guy a year older than him that he didn't know much about. What are you doing out here, Naruto-kun? Hinata asked, looking like he was shocked by her bravery. Talking to Sakura-chan, Naruto said happily, already adding the familiar term to the girl's name. What about you? Hinata began. That's none of your concern, Neji said bluntly. Why do you need an apartment? Naruto asked. That's none of your concern, Neji repeated. You can use mine, Naruto said happily, it has lots of room. Hinata almost fainted at the idea. Neji looked somewhat shocked that some kid he had only sort of seen as a person had offered to let him share his apartment. What about your parents? Neji asked. Haven't got any. Neji looked somewhat surprised. Naruto-kun is an orphan, Neji-Nisan. He lives on his own. Hinata whispered. Sakura was looking at Naruto with sadness. I live with my auntie, Sakura said. My mommy and daddy are always away on business. She said the word after a moment of thought, having to remember what her aunt said. There was a sound of pounding footsteps and a black-haired boy dashed into their midst and stopped, looking at the small group that had appeared with a bit of surprise. This was a very busy night at the playground. What are you doing here? The boy asked angrily. We could ask the same of you, Neji pointed out. Naruto recognized the newcomer as Uchiha Sasuke, a boy in his year at the academy. They had never spoken with one another, mostly because Sasuke was at the top of the class and Naruto was the ever-dead last. Other than that, Naruto knew pretty much nothing about Sasuke, other than that he was a jerk with a ton of fangirls. That's none of your business, Sasuke spat. Everyone saying that, Naruto whined. What are you doing here anyways? Neji asked, looking annoyed. I always hang out here at night, Naruto said in a tone that implied just how obvious he thought the fact was. Why? Sakura asked curiously, but when everyone looked at her, she made a small, meeping sound and took a few steps back. Why not? Naruto asked with a shrug, for the first time, looking a little more serious. No one really cares. The silence after that was so complete that everyone was able to hear the soft sound of someone walking slowly towards them. A boy about their age wandered into view. He had black hair and eyes like Sasuke, but his hair was cut short, and there was something about him that was creepy. He was wearing a black ninja outfit, and he didn't seem to notice them. When he finally looked up and noticed the 5 children looking at him, he stopped and smiled. Hello. They all just sort of stared at him. Is it usual to meet here? The boy asked. Looking at them like he really didn't know that a group of kids meeting in the dark was strange. I'm sorry if I've interrupted anything. No, just a stupid talk about what we're doing here, Naruto said. He smiled back in place. What are you doing here? I went for a walk, the boy said. A walk? Sasuke repeated looking skeptical. The boy nodded with that somewhat irritating smile on his face. Even Naruto was looking skeptical now. He knew that most kids weren't allowed outside after sunset. In fact, this was the first time he had seen anyone out after dark. Naruto was many things, but a complete idiot was not one of them. He knew perfectly well that there was something wrong with that explanation. Either this guy didn't have parents or he was lying. Before Naruto could think of something clever to say, everyone stiffened as more footsteps and voices. This time they were the voices of 2 grown men. All 6 children looked at one another and plunged into the bushes. Naruto guessed for the same basic reason. They didn't want to get caught and in trouble for being out this late. Everyone knew that there was an unofficial curfew. I don't see why we couldn't have met in a more convenient location. The voice of the Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi, reached them. I apologize for bringing you out here, Hokage-sama, but I did not wish to be eavesdropped on, a cold, curt voice said. Naruto noticed the boy who had just come stiffen. You know him? Naruto asked. Shush, came 4 responses. Even Hinata had shushed him. Danzo-sama, was all that the boy said. The speakers walked into full view. The first, an old man in long, white robes with a large hat, was the Hokage, a well-loved old man who had taken back his position when Fourth died during the attack of the Kyuubi. The other was a man that Naruto had never seen in his life. Half of his face and his arm were wrapped in bandages, yet there was something about him that made Naruto uneasy. Although he seemed harmless, he emanated something dangerous and somehow foul. Naruto didn't know how he knew this, but something told him that this man, Danzo, was a threat. "Well, we've come here," Sarutobi said, sounding somewhat tired. "What was so important to ask me to come to a playground at 10:30? "Hokage-sama, you are growing old," Danzo began. "I think I have 10 more years left in me," the old man said with a smile. "I don't think that is a good idea," Danzo said calmly. "As you grow old, the Leaf's enemies begin to see a weakness. Sooner or later, there will be an attack, and you are aging, and even the best ninja cannot defeat time. There will be an opponent that you cannot defeat. I know that we have been rivals for the position of Hokage for decades, and that our ideals differ, but I feel that it would be best if you considered a new candidate for Hokage. You wish for my abdication and for me to proclaim you my heir," Sarutobi said, his voice growing cold. "I feel that I am the only candidate," Danzo said calmly. "None of the young show the potential of the fourth, and I am the most powerful ninja in the village besides you. I also have the experience necessary for a leader." "I'm sorry, Danzo-san," Sarutobi said softly. "I can't consider that request at the moment. Things are too hectic in the village at the moment for there to be a change in power." "I see," Danzo said, and Naruto felt something, but before he could even think straight of what it was, he saw the Hokage stumble and fall on his back, blood shooting out of his mouth. "I told you that you would meet an opponent that you couldn't defeat," Danzo said softly, a small smile forming on his lips. "Such a pity. I even thought to give you a chance to live. You've grown weak and stupid in your old age, Sarutobi, to allow a man who had always been a rival and enemy to speak to you alone. Don't worry about your precious village. It will be far more powerful under me than you or the fourth could have dreamed. A pity really that rock nins were capable of making it past the Anbu to assassinate you. I will be the only candidate in the war to avenge you." Calmly, like nothing at all had happened, Danzo walked over the body of the man that he had killed, and walked down the path, disappearing in a moment. Naruto's mind felt like it had frozen. Nothing was coming out straight. The old man couldn't be dead. He was unstoppable, he was Hokage. "Old man," Naruto whispered. The others stood in dead silence. "We're lucky to be alive," the strange boy said softly. Danzo-sama wasn't paying attention. We shouldn't be alive?" "Old man," Naruto screamed, running over to the body of the old man, outside of Iruka-sensei, who had cared if he was alive. "Old man, please, wake up, you can't die, you're Hokage?" Naruto didn't feel the other children run up behind him. He didn't hear the whispered warnings to be quiet. He truthfully couldn't have cared less if Danzo came back and killed them. All that mattered was that the man he thought of as a grandfather was dead. Tears coursed down his face as he sobbed. Slowly, the eyes of the Sandaime opened and took in the 6 faces looking at him. "You saw?" They nodded. "Take these. You must leave, take them somewhere safe. Don't let him have them," he gasped out, blood coming from his mouth. "Naruto, I proclaim you my heir, as it should have been, if the council hadn't forbade me, become a Hokage like none before you." Slowly, the Hokage raised his hands and preformed a series of seals. There was a small pop, and a group of scrolls appeared before them. "These can't be found by Danzo, too powerful, take them. Somewhere, safe, hold, secrets, Uchiha, Hyuga, too dangerous, secret limits, Tenchi Byakugan, sealing, keep them safe, stop, Danzo, Naruto, the Kyuubi, sealed, Naruto." Slowly the old man's eyes began to glaze over. Naruto shook him as hard as he could, but finally, he straightened up, his eyes dull. Finally, he became aware of his surroundings. Hinata was sobbing quietly into Neji while he supported her, looking shocked and frightened while unshed tears blurred his white eyes. Sasuke was staring with dull horror at the body. Sakura was sobbing loudly in fear and sorrow. "I want to go home," she gasped between sobs. "We can't go back," the newcomer said suddenly. "Danzo-sama will kill us if he knows about this, and eventually, he will know." "Why are you calling that filthy murderer Sama?" Naruto spat angrily. "Who the heck are you anyways?" "Sigh," the boy said, "I'm a member of Root." "What?" Sasuke asked. "It's not important," Sai said, shaking his head, "we must leave right now. Danzo will kill us all." "Besides," Naruto said softly, Looking at the pile of scrolls, Old Man Hokage gave us an order. We have to take these out of here. I'm not sure, Neji said, he was delirious. How are we going to project those scrolls? We're just academy students. I think that. Hinata began, then she took a deep breath. We don't have a choice. Sakura sobbed out in fear. Mommy and Daddy will lose their daughter anyways, Sasuke said bluntly, either you run and live, or stay and die. I don't care what you do. I'm gonna do what the old man told me, Naruto told them all. He said get these safe, and I'm gonna do it as the future Hokage of Konoha. And then I'm gonna come back super strong and kill him and become Hokage. Naruto turned around, not looking behind him, gathered up the scrolls as well as he could and ran as fast as he could towards the gates. Sai followed him without a second thought. He was raised to be Danzo's tool, but he didn't want to die. Besides, Naruto reminded Sai of his brother. Maybe it was a gift. Hinata paused for a moment and dashed after him. Her crush had changed to admiration. Neji followed his cousin, not wanting to lose the family that he had just gained. Sakura stood terrified, staring at the body and at the retreating figures. I'm sorry, Mommy, Daddy, Auntie. I hope I'll be back soon. I don't want to die, she whispered as she followed the others. Sasuke stared at the others, not really wanting to follow the Dobi, since he knew that if he did follow it would be like assenting to his leadership. Finally, he decided that he didn't really want to be a leader anyways and that he was still more powerful than Naruto would ever be. Conflict resolved, Sasuke shot after them. It was the beginning of a legend. In the end, everyone held one scroll. The scrolls were huge, and everyone was surprised that Naruto could have held all of them for as long as he had. They all supposed that it had something to do with his excitement. The six crouched in the shadows of a building, watching the gate cautiously. They were planning to make a dash for freedom, but the Chunin guards didn't seem to be showing any signs of not paying attention. In fact, an Anbu had decided to drop by and was helping the two Chunin on watch. This is just great, Sasuke muttered sarcastically. Shut up, Neji hissed. Did you hear something? One of the Chunin asked the Anbu. There was a quick intake of 6 breaths. No, the Anbu replied in a dulled tone. Naruto let go of the air and shifted a little. There had to be a way to get around these guys. They just needed to think of one. Maybe he could try to distract them. He had never tried anything on the guards, but there was a good change that things wouldn't be too much different. They would chase him, and eventually lose him. Maybe he would have time to get out of Konoha before they got back. Just before he jumped up to do something that would have been considered either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, there was a sound of wheels approaching. The group turned to see a covered cart moving towards them. 2 men were moving it up to the gates, and they were stopping frequently. This thing weighs a ton, the younger of the 2 complained. Yeah, the other agreed. Tell you what, we're going to be traveling most of the night anyways, so let's get a drink before we leave to give us some energy. Yeah, the first said enthusiastically. Both men moved the cart into a corner and wandered off to one of the nearby bars. Naruto knew that they were almost always open. Even the ramen shop that he always ate at would eventually close, but these things seemed to be open all the time. Vaguely, Naruto wondered just what these drinks that the adults had really were. He had more experience than most people with people who had too much of the drinks. The people who lived below him always seemed to be having them, and they did the strangest things. They would laugh, cry, hug one another, punch each other for no real reason and talk about their mothers. Hey, I got an idea, Naruto announced. What? Sai asked. Those guys are leaving Konoha, right? Naruto asked. Yes, Sasuke nodded. They have a big cart that's covered, right? Naruto asked. Right. Neji had a small smirk as he saw where this was going. Well, Naruto trailed off. We could hide there, Hinata whispered. Right, Naruto grinned. Slowly they crept towards the cart. Naruto was sure that the sound of his own heart was going to betray him to the guards. It was so loud. Or what if he sneezed or one of the others sneezed? Naruto stumbled a little, but before he fell, Hinata had grabbed the back of his shirt. It seemed like an eternity before they made it to the cart, and even longer for them to all pile into it. Naruto realized quickly that it was going to be a long, uncomfortable trip. The cart was full of large, heavy-looking vessels. There was barely enough room for the 6 of them to squeeze together, and with the scrolls, if one of them moved so much as an elbow, all the others were going to have to move, and someone would probably end up on someone else's lap. The little group arranged itself as best they could in a circle with the scrolls in the center. No one dared to speak as the minutes dragged on. All of them were probably too afraid of being discovered, Naruto thought, since this really was the only change they were going to have to get away. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered just why everything was going so well. The whole thing had begun to have an unreal feel to it, like some sort of dream, but the words of Sai haunted him. "We shouldn't be alive." Naruto suppressed a shudder. After waiting in total silence for over an hour, the over loud voices and somewhat dragging footsteps of the two men became audible. "Man, that was great." The younger man's voice was somewhat slurry. "Konoha Sake is the best," the other proclaimed. "You said that about Kumo too," the first pointed out. "Did I? Yeah, who cares?" There was a lurch as the cart began to move. Both men swore loudly about the weight and the children sat, frozen with fear. Evening, a new voice called, "What's your business?" Leaving, the older man said, "We know it's not policy to let us out at this time, but we're kind of behind schedule, and we need to get going. Our boss is gonna kill us." "You're with that packing company, right?" the voice of the second Chunin asked. "Well, we've worked with you guys long enough to know that you're not up to anything. We'll just do the routine check and you can be on your way." "I'll do it," a calm, young voice said. "Probably the Anbu." Sasuke twitched somewhat. Naruto looked at him strangely, and noticed that his eyes were huge. The flap opened before Naruto could think of anything, and a uniformed man with a weasel mask was staring at them. All six stared back in horror. The Anbu made a quick hand sign and a scroll appeared in Sasuke's lap. There was no bang, or any other sound to give away the action. Sasuke stared at the man with a kind of wonder. "Good luck, Otouto." Naruto barely heard the whisper. "It's clear," the man said in a normal tone. "Proceed." There was another lurch as the cart went back into motion. "Night, and good luck," one of the Chunin called. It was the beginning of new day. Uchiha Itachi walked quickly back to the Uchiha district. All in all, he felt rather proud of himself. He had no real love for his family other than his younger brother, and if Sasuke had finally gotten fed up with his treatment and run off with some friends, Itachi wasn't going to do a thing about it. Sasuke was the other member of the family who had even looked at him with love. The rest of his clan, including his parents, saw him simply as a tool to gain more power. Even his best friend, Shishui, sometimes looked at him with total jealousy. He would say nothing to his clan. Perhaps they would notice that a valuable scroll that contained copies of the Uchiha's signature moves had disappeared. They would notice that before noticing that Sasuke was gone. He turned a corner and was so caught in his own thoughts that he didn't see the figure of the man in the shadows. "Uchiha Itachi?" Itachi turned around. It was the beginning of a nightmare. Hyuga Hiyashi was not a cruel man. He loved his eldest daughter more than he would ever say. She reminded him so much of his dead wife with her gentle ways and quiet personality. It had broken his heart to disown her. Neji would take care of her. He assured himself. There was nothing better that Hinata could have done than remove the seal from her cousin. He was strong and dedicated. Once he had something to believe in, he would follow it until he died. The council would have never let her be the new head at any rate. They would have passed over her and chosen Hanabi, who was better at hiding her feelings and behaving as they thought a Hyuga should. If only he had the power that people thought he had. Hiyashi's thoughts were interrupted by the door flying open. "Hiyashi-sama." A head family member stood at the door, looking breathless. "The Hokage is dead." "What?" Hiyashi's cold mask faded instantly. "He's been found at the playground, assassinated. All signs are of Rocknens. The council has called for an emergency meeting, but Danzo has already been nominated as the next Hokage." It was the beginning of terror. It was the beginning of Hikume. A hard jolt from the cart woke Naruto from a scattered dream that he couldn't remember a second later. He was surprised that he had been able to fall asleep with everything that had happened. Just the thought of the murder of the Hokage made bile rise in Naruto's mouth. He looked around at the forms of the others. Sasuke had curled himself into a little ball on his side, but it looked somewhat painful since he had curled into Neji's feet. Neji had curled around with his back to Sasuke, but had a tendency to kick. Sakura was between Naruto and Sai. She had managed to fall asleep sitting up, and didn't notice that Sai's head was on her lap. Hinata was on Neji's other side, and she was sleeping on top of him. Naruto had managed to lean back in the cart without making a lot of noise. He was glad that none of them snored. Naruto still did not quite believe they had managed to pull it off. Every time the two men, who were named Daisuke and Shin, stopped for some reason, usually to complain, Naruto would start to get a feeling of terror in his stomach that someone had come after them. Nothing ever happened, and it seemed like they had escaped without anyone being the wiser. Daisuke and Shin had been traveling all night, and their stowaways had no time to speak. There were plenty of things that Naruto really wanted to ask, and from the looks that they were all given one another, especially to Sai, they all had questions that they wanted answered. Right now there was nothing that could be done. Naruto tried to ease himself into a comfortable position, but it was hard when Sakura moved and her elbow was crushing Naruto's side. It was then that he noticed that they weren't moving. Time to turn in for the night, Daisuke, the younger of the two, said with a loud yawn. More like turn in for the day, Shin pointed out. Naruto could tell that Daisuke had shrugged. Same difference. There was the sound of people moving around and setting something up. For about 10 minutes everything was silent. Naruto looked at the others again. Sasuke had opened his eyes and Sai was sitting up. The others looked like they were still asleep. The three stared at one another for 10 more minutes until they heard the grinding sound of someone snoring. Hinata's white eyes were opened and she looked around at the others. Neji, disturbed at the motion, twitched slightly and sat up. "Mommy?" Sakura mumbled sleepily, "I had a bad dream." "No, you didn't," Sasuke contradicted. Sakura opened her eyes and stared at the faces around her. She looked like she was going to cry, but controlled herself. "Well," Neji said, "I guess it's time to answer some questions." "Yeah," Naruto agreed, "like who the heck is Danzo?" And the Anbu who helped us," Hinata added. "And what we're going to do," Sasuke muttered. "First things first," Naruto said, turning to Sai, "who is Danzo?" "He is the leader of Root, a select branch of Anbu. He was the Sandaime Hokage's rival since before he was elected, and remained against his teachings." Sai repeated all the information in the well-practiced, yet impartial voice of someone reciting a lesson that they had learned by heart. He carefully selected people who were orphans or who had the correct mindset to teach them to be superior ninja. Also, he has a strict policy of secrecy. No one in Root knows everyone else in Root, making it impossible for potential spies to completely destroy the organization. He wishes to reform Konoha into a powerful nation that the world would respect and fear. Sasuke was looking at him with total suspicion. "So, what's to keep you from going back telling your boss just where we are when we're not looking?" he asked, his eyes narrowed. "It would be bad for me to do such a thing," Sai said, that strange smile on his face again. "Danzo-sama would kill me if he knew what I had seen, even if I turned you into him as well. I have no choice but to follow you." "Is your name really Sai?" Hinata asked suddenly. Naruto looked at her in surprise. Why would he lie about that? "No, I don't have a name," Sai replied, still with that smile, "but I would like it if you called me that. I read it in a book." Alright," Hinata mumbled. There was a silence that was only broken by the sound of loud snores coming from outside. Neji looked over to Sasuke, his white eyes narrowed slightly. "Who was the Anbu, Uchiha?" he asked. "You definitely knew him." Sasuke looked somewhat annoyed at being called by his family name, but didn't say anything about it. Naruto guessed that there was some sort of rivalry between the Hyuga and Uchiha clans, and vaguely remembered hearing a young Uchiha grumbling to his friend about stupid clan one-upmanship at a restaurant before he was noticed and kicked out. He didn't really care all that much though. "My brother, Itachi," Sasuke said after a moment. "I don't know why he didn't report us though. He's been really quiet lately, and only been talking to Shishui and me." "Maybe he's fed up with the clan," Naruto suggested. "Why would he be?" Sasuke spat. "Everyone worships him. Or maybe he just wanted to get rid of you," Neji muttered. "You could have replaced him." Sasuke laughed softly at that. A hard cold laugh that didn't suit someone his age. He sounded 10 years older. "That would require my parents to notice that I exist," he whispered. After another drawn-out silence which no one knew what to say to break it, Naruto spoke up. "So we know that this guy is your brother, he's really quiet, and Anbu, and he let us get out, but other than that, we don't know anything." There was a general assent. "Now what do we do?" Sakura asked, speaking up for the first time since she had woken. "Split up when we reach a town," Sasuke suggested. "That's stupid," Naruto muttered. "We should stay together. There are more of us, so we'll be able to take care of each other." Sasuke's eyes flashed. Who died and made you the leader? The old man, Naruto shot back, but then quieted. Everyone was glaring at him for mentioning the Hokage, and even Naruto knew that he had gone too far. Sorry, Naruto said quietly, I'm not used to talking to people, I'm used to yelling things a lot. So I say things that, maybe I shouldn't. What kind of an excuse is that? Neji asked, looking annoyed. Sasuke didn't join in. He was looking at Naruto strangely. Why? He asked. Naruto-kun lives alone. Hinata told Sasuke, like she had told Neji, I don't think that most of the adults like him very much. I've only seen Iruka-sensei and him ever treat him well. Sasuke blinked once. He had never really cared about the lives of other people, and the thought that someone else was suffering was a new thought to him. One he didn't really like. Why? Sakura asked. Her curiosity was obvious. He seems nice, I like him. Hinata flushed a deep crimson. Naruto shrugged, he was smiling again. It doesn't matter. We're all out, and I think we should stay together. He spoke like nothing had happened. I agree, Sai said, it would be better for us. Fine, Sasuke said, looking away. Sakura nodded. Neji didn't look too happy, but he noticed Hinata's hopeful look, and nodded his assent. So we're going to stay together, he muttered, and what? They all looked at each other. Find a place to hide the scrolls? Sakura suggested. I have a better idea, Sasuke said, his eyes on the scrolls. We have to learn to defend ourselves, so why not learn the jutsus? But we're just academy students, Hinata pointed out. Sasuke's right, Neji said, we're completely defenseless now. But, Hinata started. It's okay, Hinata-chan, Naruto said, not noticing the blush that accompanied his use of the honorific. We have to protect this stuff. But no one said anything about not learning it. Besides, how can we protect them if we can't fight? Alright, Hinata mumbled. Iruka Amino was worried by 4:30. Although the Hokage had been assassinated, there had been class at the academy that day. Mostly because doing things like nothing was wrong would keep the populace from a general panic. Also, most of the adult civilians as well as the ninja, from genin on up, had been summoned to a hearing. Parents wanted their children under the protection of Chunin in a time of crisis, particularly when they weren't around to protect them. Some weren't there like the Hyuga girl and boy and the Uchiha, but that was, Iruka assumed, because their parents didn't want it out of the house. Yet it wasn't the children he was worried about, or the meeting. It was a specific loud, blonde boy that had made him look at the clock every so often and bite his lip. He knew that Naruto would sometimes skip class for some reason, but he would always come and give some sort of excuse. Iruka didn't always know why Naruto really skipped, and sometimes he wondered if it had to do with some of the accidents that happened every so often around him. This time was different. Naruto was sometimes thoughtless, and like all very young ninja children seemed to think that he was invincible. Also, the Hokage was one of the few who was kind to the boy. It was completely in Naruto's character to run off and try to avenge the Hokage himself. The idea of Naruto hearing about the murder and running off only to be killed himself made Iruka forget what he was saying. Not like it really mattered. The students were mostly being allowed to play games while they waited for their parents. He had hated Naruto when he first arrived, only seeing him as the demon that had killed his parents, but as time had gone on, he had watched the horror that was Naruto's life. It would have been kinder if they had attacked him. It would have been better if they had flat out treated him like they wanted, because the determined refusal to see that he existed was even worse than hateful words and physical abuse. Naruto went through life ignored. People refused to see him. They acted like he simply didn't exist. Other than the very few who would try to hurt him by accident, Konoha had taken the Hokage's order of not speaking of what Naruto was, and changed it to pretending that there was no Naruto. Iruka had taken Naruto to that ramen shop the first time out of a morbid curiosity. He wanted to know just what the demon brat was really like. Naruto had hugged him so hard around the middle when Iruka invited him that the teacher was sure that he was going to pass out. At dinner Naruto had talking about everything. His dream to be Hokage, his wanting to learn new techniques, his being bored all the time at the lessons, his pranks, how much he couldn't wait to be a ninja and show everyone how wonderful he was, and be acknowledged. Things had become habit, and quickly, Iruka had realized just how wrong he had been. Naruto was many things, impetuous being one of the most notable, but he was no demon. He sighed and tried to force his attention somewhere else. There was a knock at the door and a tired, sick-looking man with heavy dark circles entered. "Hayate," Iruka said in surprise, "is the meeting over already?" Hayate shook his head and coughed a little, walking up so that only Iruka could hear him. "No, they're still talking about what's to be done. I'm here to tell you something else. I know that you care a lot for your students, so I thought that you should be informed. This last night a girl named Haruno Sakura didn't return home at dinner, and this morning there was a search for her. It seems that not only her but Uchiha Sasuke, Hyuga Neji, Hyuga Hinata, and Uzumaki Naruto have vanished. I went to Naruto's house personally. There is no sign of a struggle or of packing. Danzo-sama believes that they were kidnapped by the rock nin that assassinated the Sandame." Iruka didn't hear the rest of what Hayate was saying. He was too busy staring out the window and making the decision that for the second time in his life he was going to get so drunk he could barely stand. The trip was long. Naruto was ready to die of boredom by the second day. The schedule ran very simply. They would wake up, read the scroll that they had chosen, listen to Daisuke and Shin talk, complain, and wait until they went to sleep to talk. If someone had to, as Hinata put, use the toilet, they would have to hold it until the two went to sleep. It was risky, but miraculously, they hadn't been discovered. Food and water were not a problem. Apparently, Daisuke and Shin were part of a trading company that sent people to most of the hidden villages, and the vessels contained luxury items. Most of them had expensive-looking fruits and juices. After the first talk, the little group would talk not only about future plans but about themselves. They shared little things, their favorite foods, hobbies, and favorite animals. On the second day, Naruto got up the courage to ask why everyone had been out at the playground that night. Surprisingly, this time even Sasuke and Neji answered. Hinata and Neji had been disowned from their clan. Sasuke had run away. Sakura had been crying because all of the girls at the playground had made fun of her forehead and she lost track of time. Naruto was just there because he was bored. And Sai had wanted to clear his head after hearing about his brother's death and had walked in the right direction. Strangely enough, in 2 days, the beginnings of friendships were starting to be visible. Sasuke and Naruto, although they were polar opposites, were showing the signs of becoming best friends, and Sakura and Hinata were starting to put their heads together and whisper a lot. Sai and Neji started to tolerate one another, and they all were starting to accept each other without insults. The hushed fighting of the first night was not repeated. At first because they felt that they would have to work together to survive, and later because they were beginning to genuinely like one another. The landscape was starting to change rapidly from forest to field and from field to desert. Sai said that it looked like they were headed to Suna. Naruto had heard some people occasionally talking about the hidden sand. They were supposed to the allies of Konoha, but they were warlike and many people didn't trust them as far as they could throw them. He didn't know much more than that though. Naruto wished that he could have been able to watch the scenery a little more. He had never been out of Konoha and he felt like he was missing something. Still, he read his scroll and bottled up his feelings. The scroll of sealing was old and very complex. Strangely, Naruto seemed to have a talent for learning difficult techniques, while the simple ones that most children his age knew, like the simple Hanjir Bushin, escaped him. For some reason, the ideas of the scroll of seals just made sense to him. Naruto couldn't wait for a chance to see if he was able to use the techniques. It was afternoon on the 5th day when they pulled into Suna. Naruto and the others had just started to wonder what would happen when the cart was checked when they heard the sound of Daisuke's voice. "Here's the regular shipment," he sounded cheerful. "Yeah, you're Daisuke Ueda, right? Satoshi here thinks your sister and Iwa's a real beauty," a guard said. He sounded like he was bored and wasn't really thinking about what he was saying. "How would you know that?" Daisuke's voice had become suspicious. The guard sounded a little panicky. "Move along." The cart began to move again. "I'm going to have a talk with Saya," Daisuke was muttering. Naruto and the others stared at each other in shocked joy. They had managed to escape capture twice. Their triumphs were starting to make Naruto a little overconfident. Obviously there was a higher deity up there who liked them. When the cart stopped and Daisuke and Shin wandered off for their first drink, the 6 children cautiously slipped out of the cart. Naruto got his first look at another hidden village. Suna was not at all like Konoha. The buildings were mostly a uniform tan color and the people mostly wore off-white robes. The sandstone buildings had a forbidding look and the clear sky seemed empty somehow. Yet the shops and the noise of the people was the same as home. The group's Konoha clothes stood out vividly in the sea of browns and whites, yet few people looked at the little group as they passed. They were used to the children of wealthy merchants milling around without supervision, and these children seemed no different than most. What should we do now? Sakura asked, looking around at the buildings. I don't know, Naruto admitted. Has anyone been here before? There was a small chorus of no's, and Neji began to look thoughtful. Maybe we should split up for now and see if we can find somewhere to stay, he suggested. There should be a playground around here somewhere. We should meet there at sunset and compare what we've found. But what if someone takes one of us? Hinata pointed out. Nothing will happen, Naruto assured her. Who would want to kidnap us? Naruto had been alone all of his life, and he didn't understand what people were so worried about with kidnappings. He had never had to worry about a thing, and he had always run around unattended. Yeah, we'll be fine, Sasuke agreed. What kind of ninja village would this be if their Anbu let us get kidnapped in broad daylight? And so 6 children went running in different directions. Naruto wandered down the road, enjoying himself tremendously. The excitement of the new city was getting to him. The new sights, people, and feelings were enough to make Naruto forget about everything that had happened, but the weight of the scroll tied to his back with some rope that they had found in a corner of the cart brought his mind back. He kept walking and looking around. So far he didn't see anything that looked like a good place to hole up for the night. For a moment when they first got there, Naruto had thoughts about staying there permanently, but walking around Suna told Naruto that there was no way they would be able to stay. They would have to leave as soon as possible. Naruto noticed that he was reaching a break in the wall of buildings, and he walked faster. It was a large patch of sand with some playground equipment scattered around. Some kids were running around with a soccer ball, and they didn't seem to see the newcomer. Naruto was considering continuing on, but his mind was made up for him when one of the kids kicked the ball so that it flew directly at Naruto's head. With a startled yell, Naruto tried to kick it back. He felt his foot connect with the ball, and saw it shoot away from him. Naruto stood in shock that he had been able to kick it away. The last time when Kiba had done that, Naruto had opened his eyes to find himself flat on his back with a spectacular-looking bruise on his forehead. Did just reading a scroll have that much affect? Naruto's triumph was short-lived. He had somehow managed to kick the ball so that it landed on top of a ledge. The group who had been playing with it all surrounded Naruto. Hey, you, the leader said indignantly, what do y'all think that you're doing, kicking our ball up there? I didn't do it on purpose, Naruto shot back, it was going to knock my head off. Well, you kicked it, so you had to get it, one of the kids, a girl, said. What, you think I can fly? Naruto muttered, walking over so that he could see the cliff. There was no way that Naruto was going to be able to climb that thing. Naruto stood there, with the group watching him, waiting for some brilliant idea to come to him. There was no way that he was going to get out of this without the ball. Naruto wished that he could do that cage bushin thing that he had been reading about so that he could make a ladder of Naruto's to climb, but he didn't think he could. Come on, he growled at the soccer ball, come down. As to be expected, the soccer ball did nothing. But the ground around the soccer ball began to move. A small section of the sand, with the ball, began to float down right in front of Naruto's eyes. It slowly descended until it was caught by a small boy around Naruto's age that he hadn't noticed had walked up. He was shorter than Naruto, with messy dark red hair and shockingly light blue eyes that had black rings around them. He looked at Naruto shyly and held up the ball. Here, thanks, Naruto said, walking up and talking it with a large grin. The boy's eyes widened in shock that someone would actually come up and take it. He turned around to give the ball back to the others when he noticed that they had all backed up and were looking at the newcomer with terror. It's Gaara, the leader said, his eyes looking like they were going to pop out of his head. Run. Naruto stared as the group ran off, and looked at Gaara. He was looking at Naruto like he was preparing himself for something. What's with them? Naruto asked, shaking his head, and what am I supposed to do with this ball? Gaara blinked once. There's afraid of me, he mumbled with his head down, because of my sand. It was Naruto's turn to blink. That's stupid, he said, losing interest in the other kids and tossing the ball over his shoulder. What happened to you eyes? Did you get hit by the soccer ball? I did once, but it only hit me in the forehead. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, by the way. Gaara looked like he was not at all sure what to do. My name is Gaara, He told Naruto after a moment where he figured out that Naruto probably wanted to know his name. I've always had these things around my eyes. Oh, they're like my whiskers, Naruto said, pointing to them. I asked Iruka-sensei. He's my sensei back home, what they were, and he said that they were called birthmarks. I've never seen someone else with them before though. Gaara was still half staring at Naruto. Aren't you afraid of me? He asked tentatively. No, Naruto replied blankly, you're not scary. See, can we be friends? Gaara shut his eyes tightly, waiting for the refusal he was sure would come. Yeah, Naruto said, looking confused. No one had ever asked him to be friends before. Mostly he just latched on to people and harassed them to play with him. Sasuke, Hinata, Sai, Neji, and Sakura were the first people that he had ever thought of as friends, but they had never said as much. It was just understood between them, and I'll show you my other friends, you'll really like them. Really? Gaara asked. Yeah, Sasuke acts like a bit of a jerk, but once you get past that, he's cool. Sai's kind of weird, but I think he's okay, and the more you talk to him, the more normal he gets. Hinata's really shy, but she's nice. Sakura's cute, but she's really shy too. Neji's kind of like Sasuke, but he's more quiet. Gaara listened with interest as Naruto described his friends. He had never spoken to anyone his own age. The only person who had been nice to him before this was Yashimaru, but this was different. Yashimaru was always nice to him, but this Naruto was more than nice. He was fun. The blonde man named Yashimaru watched the Kekkei's youngest son and the strange boy. He had never seen him before and his clothes were those of Konoha. Was he a merchant's son? He had received no word about it from the Kekkei, and from what he had heard, Konoha was going to be at war with Iwa shortly. What was this kid doing here? Yashimaru thought about jumping down and breaking things up, but decided against it for now. He would wait until this kid became afraid of Gaara and jumped down to play the loving uncle. It would only be a matter of time. In the meantime, perhaps he should look at the letter that Danzo, the new Hokage, had sent to the Kekkei. He had asked them to be on the lookout for a group of children, and this might be one of them. Danzo had no intention of looking for the children who had run off even if one of them happened to be his subordinate. They had all run away at the perfect time. Things were not quite as easy as Danzo had thought. People had grown accustomed to peace and didn't want to break it, even to avenge the assassination. The children had been a gift. 3 of them even came from prestigious clans. One was just a local girl, but the other, Uzumaki, was even better than the first 3. To think that the demon vessel had gone missing. It was Prefect. Konoha would be terrified that he was in enemy hands. There was a chance that he would be turned into a weapon against them. Now they had to go to war, if only to get the Uzumaki back. Danzo smiled thinly. As 3 of the root members entered. There was no sign of the children. The only people to leave Konoha that night had been a pair of civilians with that packing company that had been trading with everyone. They had been checked by Uchiha Itachi. While he had no dealings with the prodigy himself, he knew that as an Anbu he would have noticed a small group of children. Vaguely he wondered just how they had managed to do it. Sai would have been no use to him, since the boy knew practically nothing about such things, and he doubted that they would have been smart enough to use the sewers. It didn't matter, he had ordered his forces to kill the children if they found them, and to hide the body of Uzumaki Naruto. There was no way that Danzo would let go of an opportunity that had fallen into his lap at such an opportune moment. Konoha was going to war. Gaara didn't have a clue where Naruto and the others could stay. After Naruto was sure he could trust Gaara he had asked, but Gaara hadn't known anywhere. Although he lived in Suna, Naruto learned that he was seldom anywhere other than the playground or his house. Naruto was disappointed. He had hoped that meeting someone from the village would help move his search along. It was starting to get dark, and Naruto was beginning to worry about the others. He hoped that nothing had happened to them. He hadn't even thought about it before, but now the idea that they could get kidnapped didn't seem quite as far-fetched as it had earlier. When Naruto saw the form of Hinata walking towards them, he had felt better. Gaara drew back a little, but Naruto called Hinata over. She stopped when she saw Gaara, but continued after a moment's pause. Who's he? She asked when she had walked up. This is Gaara, Naruto introduced, he lives around here. I was asking him if he knew where we could stay. Did you find anything? No, Hinata sighed, there was nothing. Crud, Naruto mumbled. You could stay with me, Gaara suggested suddenly. What? Naruto asked, but there are 6 of us. Your parents won't be too happy. I don't live with my father, Gaara said smiling somewhat, I live with my uncle, Yashimaru. I don't think you'll mind. Really? Further conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Neji, Sai, Sasuke, and Sakura, who had met up with each other earlier. They were somewhat annoyed when Naruto admitted that he had mostly spent his time talking with Gaara instead of looking for a place to stay, but they were a little pacified when Naruto told them about Gaara's offer. There was an unspoken agreement between all of them that they would leave Suna the next day. There was no place for them to live, and their Anbu had seemed slightly suspicious of them. Naruto hadn't noticed, but Sasuke and Neji had. Both of them had learned more from living with their families than Naruto had, and both knew that the ninja shouldn't be quite so active. Something was wrong. Sasuke had a feeling that it was that Danzo creep. He had said that Konoha was going to go to war because of the assassination by rock nins, but he for some reason hadn't thought about how long that would take. Naturally, Suna would be sent a message. Naturally, they would be preparing for war. They would be expected to aid their ally in battle, but the way that they had been looked at had put the boy on edge. Itachi had told him about Suna once. He had said that it was a dangerous place, and that even though the Sand Nin were technically allied with Konoha, Suna had a history of betrayal and tyrant leaders. The current Kekkei had even done something to his own son, but Sasuke didn't know what it was. All he knew was the Itachi had said that it was a horrific thing to do to any human, let alone a child. They were all introduced to Gaara, who seemed to me overwhelmed by all the people talking around him. Naruto was telling the others about what had happened earlier, adding tremendous detail and turning his kick into some great ninja art. The boys, other than Sai, were looking skeptical, and Sakura was looking thoughtful. Hinata and Sai both seemed to believe it. And then the ball was surrounded by all this sand and floated down to Gaara here. Naruto finished. And? Sasuke asked. We talked and stuff. Dobi. Shut up. Both of you shut up, Neji mumbled, you're giving everyone a headache. Actually, I find it entertaining to watch, Sai supplied. Anyo, Hinata broke in. What about Gaara-kun's offer? I'm all for it, Naruto said. Sasuke nodded. It's our only choice, Sai said with a smile. I'm okay with it. Sakura smiled at Gaara, who blushed slightly and looked down. Me too, Neji agreed. Hinata nodded. I'll tell Yashimaru when he comes, Gaara said, smiling widely for the first time in his life. There were 6 people who wanted to come to his house. He didn't know what people did at each other's houses, but he had heard that friends would stay over. They seemed to think it was fun, and Gaara wanted to be with his new friends some more. The thought that they weren't from Suna had occurred to him, but the idea that they would have to leave hadn't. For Gaara, it was the first time he had ever been with people who liked him, and the idea that they would leave was not something he could conceive of. That won't be necessary, Gaara-sama, a soft voice broke everyone from their conversations. Naruto turned to see a pale, blonde man with bandages over some parts of him. He was smiling slightly, but Naruto got a bad feeling from him. Naruto lived on his feelings. He had to. If there was someone who he just felt wasn't right, he avoided them. People who didn't feel right would sometimes give incorrect information, led him to dangerous places, or even, like once, be a spy from another village. Naruto could be fooled. He had been fooled many times before, but he could sense people's intentions better than most people. This man had something wrong with him. It wasn't like Danzo where the aura had been faint, but penetrating and somehow more dangerous than anything he had felt before. This was different. It was more obvious, but there was something sick about it at the same time. Naruto had the impression of poison that had been placed in candy, or an exploding tag that was carefully wrapped up like a present. Naruto narrowed his eyes at the man's polite manner. Keep your eyes on him, Naruto hissed to Sasuke, who happened to be next to him, he's bad news. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. Well, Gaara-sama, I suppose you'd better show your new friends where we live, Yashimaru said to Gaara. Gaara's house was huge. Even Sasuke, Neji, and Hinata, who had lived in large, expensive places all their lives, stared around in an impressed sort of way when they first walked in. They were led to what was probably Gaara's room. It was littered with toys and games, but there was no bed. A small table stood in a corner of the room with only a picture of a young smiling woman on it who looked a lot like Yashimaru. Who's this? Naruto had asked when he had seen it. My mother, Gaara told him. Where is she? Sakura had asked curiously. Dead? Oh. Neji-Nisan and my mother are dead too, Hinata supplied, probably to make Gaara feel a little better. They had spent about an hour teaching Gaara how to play some of the games in the room. Gaara didn't seem to know how to play anything. He had toys and games, but the only thing he actually seemed to play with was the teddy bear that he constantly held. He didn't really seem to play with that either, he simply held it. Naruto knew a lot of games that he had learned from random children or made up himself. Sai only knew games that were more like training exercises than anything else. Sasuke knew most solitary games, but didn't seem to play in a group much. Neji and Hinata knew the rules for plenty of games, but neither of them seemed to play them very much. By the time Yashimaru had appeared with dinner, an innocent-looking rice dish that was so hot that the boys began a new game of how many grains they could eat without tears coming out of their eyes, Gaara had become the seventh member of their group. He was quiet, and always seemed worried that if he said something wrong, they might not like him anymore, and he was surprisingly even-tempered and passive. The boys were used to roughhousing a little, and got the surprise of their lives when Naruto jumped Gaara during the game. Immediately, sand shot up around Gaara and spiked out. Naruto was thrown back and had the wind knocked out of him. When he finally got his breath back, Gaara was apologizing over and over again, and Sasuke and Neji were trying to get him to stop apologizing and tell them how he did that technique. That was really painful, but really cool, Naruto said as he sat up. You have got to teach me how to do it. I don't know how I do it, Gaara whispered, I just do. Naruto assumed that he was talking about a bloodline limit. He didn't know much about them, but he had heard that they could do things that no one else could. Crud, he muttered. As time went on, one by one, the group began to fall asleep. Each time that happened, Yashimaru would appear out of nowhere, and take them out of the room. Naruto, the last one awake, assumed that it was to some bedroom, so when he found that he had been lying in the same spot for about a half hour, too tired to move, but not quite asleep, he only felt slight discomfort at being moved. What's wrong with him, Yashimaru? Gaara was asking. Most people need to sleep, Gaara-sama, Yashimaru replied, he's just tired. Your friend will be fine in the morning. Oh, Gaara mumbled, good night? Good night, Gaara-sama. Naruto felt himself being taken down a flight of stairs. The grip was a bit harder than he would have liked, and he squirmed a little to show it. The grip tightened around him, making it hard for Naruto to breathe. You really brought this on yourself, Yashimaru whispered harshly. If you had run off like a good little brat, you might have been alive tomorrow, but I doubt it. You see, the new Hokage sent us a message to keep an eye out for you. It would be inconvenient for you to turn up when you're supposed to be kidnapped or dead. I'm not supposed to kill any of you, but if you give me any trouble, the cage will have to settle for your body. Naruto was starting to struggle wildly, kicking out and failing around to get out of the vice grip Yashimaru had him in. He looked around frantically for a way to get away from him. He was in a small room with no windows or furniture. Tied up and arranged in a neat row were Sasuke, Neji, Hinata, Sai, and Sakura. All of them were gagged and Neji had blood running down the side of his head, where Yashimaru had had to knock him out. He seemed conscious again and was glaring hatefully at the man. Naruto started to feel his head getting light and his awareness ebbing. The whole scene was beginning to take on a dreamlike quality, and his struggles were becoming feebler. A cloudy realization came to him: he was dying. This made him struggle a little harder. The hand over his mouth moved a little, and on instinct, Naruto bit down hard. He was rewarded instantly, by the taste of blood and being let go with a sharp cry. Naruto didn't know what was happening. It was almost like someone else was controlling his motions. Instead of falling to his hands and knees and gasping for breath, he had somehow managed to twist in such a way where he landed on his feet with his hands together in the form that the scroll he was carrying recommended. Kage Bushin no Justu. The words seemed to come from far away. 1.5 Narutos appeared in a cloud of smoke. The half was the legs and lower body that continued to emanate smoke. Naruto had jumped onto Yashimaru's leg and had sunk his teeth into him again. The other Naruto was hastily untying the others, and the half, which didn't seem to need eyes, was trying to kick Yashimaru in any possible place. Sasuke was the first up. He quickly started to form a set of seals that was the Uchiha family's signature move. Kaden. Gukakyu no Jutsu, Sasuke screamed and breathed out. A small tongue of flame that probably couldn't have done much more than light a candle came out of his mouth aimed at the seat of Yashimaru's pants. Sakura had attached herself to Yashimaru's other leg and was trying to pound her fists into his leg, but hadn't done much. Sai had taken out a kunai from somewhere and picked his finger. Using his own blood he drew something that looked like a cross between a lion, a dog, and a fish. The thing came to life, but did little other than cause more noise and confusion. Neji and Hinata were both punching and kicking as much as possible, but the blows were badly aimed, and hit Naruto and Sakura as much as Yashimaru. A joint bite from Naruto and punch from Neji caused Yashimaru to stumble over Sai's lion-dog-fish thing and fall flat on his back. At the moment the door that Yashimaru had closed and locked was forced open with sand, and the form of Gaara stood in the doorway. "Uncle Yashimaru, what's—" The question died on his lips when he saw his uncle's face twisted with rage and hatred at the sight of him. "Well, I suppose there's no hope for it," he snarled, "this is the end. Get away from him," Hinata screamed. Naruto looked over to her, and noticed for the first time that there was something weird with her eyes. They were glowing white-blue in the center. But it wasn't the time to ask questions. Naruto and Sakura scrambled away from him as the exploding tags attached to his body went off. It seemed for a moment like everything was going in slow motion. Naruto watched the blast coming at him and even had the time to wonder whether anyone would find their blackened bodies when he was suddenly looking at a wall of solid sand. There was a deafening blast from outside the sand and the ground shook under him. Naruto didn't have the sense to look around to see if the others were all right until the sand slowly descended and allowed him to see the burnt remains of Gaara's house. Gaara was standing, looking shocked, staring at the place where Yashimaru had been. Tears were slowly coursing down his face. Suddenly, his legs gave out and he collapsed to his hands and knees, sobbing quietly. Naruto didn't really notice what he was doing, but he saw the others were doing the same thing. Slowly, they congregated around him. Hinata had placed a hand on his shoulder. Neji and sat down next to him. Slowly, Gaara was surrounded by frightened children who were trying to give comfort, but had no idea how to give it. Naruto had no idea how long they stayed like that, but after some time, Gaara's crying had stopped. "We need to get out of here," Sai whispered. Naruto wanted to kill him. Gaara jerked at that statement and stared around with wide, frightened eyes. "Don't leave me alone," he pleaded. Madness was glinted on the edge of his eyes. One more push would send his already strained mind over the edge. "You're coming with us," Naruto said forcefully. "You're going to come with us, and we're all gonna find a place to stay together." "I am," Gaara said blankly. "Yes," Sai said, catching onto what he thought was Naruto's idea. Gaara was very powerful, and they needed as many powerful friends as they could get. "Everything will be all right." Sakura nodded. "We're all going to be a family," she promised. "A family?" Sasuke asked her, surprised. Something glinted in her eyes. "Yeah, a family," she said, louder and more forcefully than she had ever said anything in her life. "Ya got a problem?" Sasuke's eyes widened. For some reason Sakura's sudden mood swing scared him. He nodded quickly. "I'd like that," Gaara whispered. "I've never had a family." "Here," Neji said, handing him one of the two scrolls that he, as the eldest, had been carrying. "You can start reading this." Gaara slowly stood up and took the scroll. He purposely turned his back on the body of his traitorous uncle and to his new family as the stars began to go out and the sky began to show the signs of the new dawn. A blast of wind and sand surrounded 7 figures. When the Anbu arrived, there wasn't a sign of life. Just a little sand that had been picked up by the wind. It had been 2 months since Gaara had joined them. Gaara's ability to control sand had proved useful. He had teleported them outside Suna the first night, and he could sense where to find water. The frequent sandstorms that raged across the desert ended up being much less of a problem than they should have been. Gaara didn't want his new family to be hurt, and the sand always did what Gaara told it. Naruto learned many interesting things about Gaara. The most interesting was that the boy was incapable of sleeping. When he asked Gaara why, Gaara had said that the monster would eat his mind if he slept. Naruto had no idea what that meant, but he went along with it. Gaara's hold on sanity was fragile at best, and while he was getting better, he was extremely attached to all of them, and part of Naruto had a vague fear that if someone said something wrong, even as a joke, Gaara would crack. Thankfully, the others seemed to have guessed that too. Gaara received special treatment, even from the sarcastic Neji, blunt Sasuke, and the brutally honest Sai. Sai hadn't seemed to have discovered the idea of lying. If he was asked something, he would respond with the complete truth, no matter how rude it was. In fact, Sai was developing the ability to offend anyone. He seemed to think it was funny. He was slowly becoming more open, if only to the others. To everyone else he displayed the same fake smile that hid his utter lack of emotion towards them, but to Naruto, Gaara, Neji, Sasuke, Sakura, and Hinata he was slowly beginning to develop emotions. His smiles were becoming genuine, and he seemed to be content with them. Naruto had the strange feeling that he reminded Sai of someone who he never mentioned. Hinata was slowly losing her stutter. She still sometimes would if she was upset or shocked, but on the whole, the contact with the others was good for her. She still called Neji, Nisan, and Neji had started to call her Imoto. She was slowly changing from a shy, timid girl into a calm girl with an iron will. Sakura had become more outspoken during the 2 months. She acted quiet and pleasant most of the time, but every so often, she would act in a way that was completely different from her usual self. This dark Sakura, as Sasuke called her, seemed very violent, and had no problem with getting in someone's face and yelling. Sasuke had mellowed slightly. He didn't act like everyone was beneath him somehow, and he didn't challenge Naruto every time he said something. Sasuke had gained something like a fear of dark Sakura, and they found out quickly that Sasuke had an obsession with tomatoes. Neji had softened a little. He was starting to show the signs of becoming overprotective towards Hinata, and something that had always seemed tight about him had loosened. He smiled every so often and didn't seem so ready to sneer at everything that was said. Somehow Naruto had become the unofficial leader of the group. He had stopped shouting all the time, but his habit of smiling, and seemingly ever-present good mood had not faded. It might have been his cheerfulness, combined with his endurance, that made him leader. They sadly weren't able to use Gaara's ability once they left the desert. Gaara didn't seem to have that much control over his ability, and the sand obeyed his desires rather than his commands. After they got out of the desert they had to travel by foot. Since most of them had had some ninja training, they were able to find food and water. Shelter was more difficult. Normally, they were forced to sleep in the open. The incident in Suna had made them all a little paranoid, and they did their best to sleep under some kind of cover. Even if it was just some bushes, they would stay under them. They normally would stop about an hour before nightfall to work on their scrolls. They also avoided all hidden villages or places where ninja were known to frequent. This limited them to small villages mostly. They would stay in a village for about a week or so, mostly stealing food to live. Sasuke's money had long since run out, and after they would disappear. Naruto sometimes wondered why no one ever pursued them, but dismissed it as due to their abilities of sneaking away. None of them ever guessed that it was because the villagers pitied them, and took them for orphans who had been forced to live on their own. The children never stole money, and the food they stole was cheap, so the villagers ignored them, and before they were a true nuisance, they vanished and were on the road again. This night was one of the better ones, even though it was raining. They had managed to find a small cave, and Sasuke had lit a fire for them. He still couldn't produce anything that could do much other than light a fire. The light from it gave them more time than usual to read. Normally, they didn't light fires, since they were easy to see from a distance in the open, but when they had some kind of shelter, they would. It was raining more often than not now. Sai said that it had to do with the fact that they were in water country. He told them that since it was fall now, they had better be preparing for winter. Gaara looked somewhat horrified when they had described winter to him. Coming from Suna, he had never had to worry about cold before. The rest had looked at each other and wondered the same thing. Will we live to see spring? They were all in various stages of filth. Their hair was matted, faces dirty, clothes ripped and torn in various places, and there was no hope of stealing anything new. They didn't have any shoes anymore, and Sai was missing the lower half of his shirt because he had had to use it to bandage a wound around his arm. We should try to find a warm place to stay for the winter, Neji said thoughtfully. Where? Sasuke sighed. We can't go back to Suna, and even if we could, I don't think we'd make it before the first snowfall. We could try one of the closer countries, suggested Hinata. There's nowhere warm and close enough for us to travel, even if we were lucky enough to manage to stow away again, Sai told them. Maybe we'll find something in the next village, Naruto said. We can't do anything right now, so let's train. Each of them had a scroll that they were trying to learn, and all of them were learning just how difficult it was to learn from a scroll and not a teacher. While there were pictures of the seals, Naruto actually missed Iruka's long dull lectures. Somehow everything had seemed so much simpler back home. Neji had already buried himself in his scroll about the special techniques of the Hyuga clan. He had been reading hard ever since they had left Suna. He seemed to be looking for something in particular. Every so often he would look over at his cousin with a puzzled expression. When Naruto had asked him what was up, Neji had shook his head and said nothing. He seemed absorbed in something towards the back of the scroll. Sai had recently stolen a blank scroll, some ink, and a paintbrush. He was reading his scroll and attempting to bring his drawings to life. Some came out, some didn't. Hinata was practicing the forms of the gentle fist fighting style. She didn't seem to have any natural talent for it, but she was working hard to get past that. She carefully moved through every step and attack in slow motion, but she still couldn't summon up the chakra necessary. Unlike Neji, whose talent was obvious, Hinata was going to have to learn the hard way. Naruto was still working on Kage Bushin. He was now able to make 5 clones before he started to make halves. He was amazed by how little it tired him out. According to his scroll, it was a very difficult technique that even Jonin had trouble with. Sasuke was working on the scroll that his brother had given him. He still couldn't produce much more than a little tongue of flame, but he was able to do it every single time, and it was slowly getting bigger. Sakura had learned very quickly that she had surprising chakra control, but not a whole lot of chakra itself. She would have to work on that as she grew older, but right now, she was working on trying to channel it right. Imoto, Neji said suddenly, would you please activate the Byakugan for me? Why? Hinata asked, you activated yours long before I did. Yes, but there is something I want to see. Alright, Hinata said in his slight confusion, falling back on her old stutter, Byakugan. Naruto had seen Neji activate the Byakugan before, and knew what it looked like. There were no veins coming out of Hinata's head, nor did it seem like her body was somehow stressed from using it. Her eyes were the only things that were different. They were glowing blue-white at the center. I thought so, Neji said with a triumphant smirk at his own reasoning. What is it? Naruto asked curiously. I've never heard of a Byakugan like that, Sai said, moving closer. Hinata has the Tenchi Byakugan. Neji told them, according to my scroll, it's a secret limit that can't be awoken easily. This scroll doubts that it even exists. What is it? Sasuke repeated Naruto. Didn't the Hokage mention that before? Sakura trailed off. Both the Sharingan and the Byakugan have another limit attached to them. According to legend, when Amaterasu and her brother Susanoo fought for supremacy, they held a contest of who could give the best gift to a warrior. Both agreed that the gift would be something that everyone of the bloodline would carry, and the gift would manifest itself in the eyes. Susanoo, who valued raw power and the ability to kill anyone who was in his way, created the Sharingan to be the base of his gift, but to those who would go so far as to kill their best friend for power, he bestowed a greater gift, the Mangekyo Sharingan. It had far greater abilities but a single weakness. Because of the weakness of the human body, the bearer of the Mangekyo Sharingan would eventually go blind. Because of the Mangekyo Sharingan, the Uchiha clan was known as cursed. Amaterasu, who valued wisdom and knowledge more than power, created the Byakugan as her basic gift. It could be used in battle, and the gentle fist style was created for that, but the true purpose of the Byakugan was to be able to see everything. However, those who desired power for a reason that Amaterasu herself would be pleased with were granted a blessing, the Tenchi Byakugan. It had a different purpose than the normal Byakugan. It was made to be used to see and manipulate the chakra of both the user and their opponent, and it actually puts less strain on the body than the original Byakugan. Also, it is the natural enemy of the Mangekyo Sharingan, since it is impossible to trap one who bears it in a genjutsu. The last thing about it is that it allows the bearer to see and remove seals. The Hyuga family's association with the divine is because of the Tenchi Byakugan. What do you mean, the Uchiha clan is cursed? Sasuke said angrily. I didn't say they were cursed, Neji corrected, I said that they reputed to be cursed. Before Konoha, no one wanted anything to do with your family. Now they are extremely respected, but it's a dubious respect among ninja. Why? Sakura asked curiously. I didn't see that at the academy. That's because most people at your academy will never be actual ninja. Sai told her, they're just civilians, and the civilians have always worshipped the clans with Kekkei Genkai. The other ninja have always feared them a little, particularly since the clans are very secretive and strict. They also have a long history of being jerks, Naruto cut in. Huh? Gaara asked. My scroll says that the founder of the Uchiha clan, Uchiha Madara, tried to kill the first Hokage because they disagreed about how Konoha should be run. He was defeated, but he swore to come back. It has his words too. I shall return when you fools don't expect it, and I will always be near Konoha, waiting for those who have the potential to join me. They will join, whether they will it or not, for I, who possess the perfect Sharingan, am capable of all things. That's rather disturbing, Sai said. What does he mean by capable of all things? Sasuke asked. I don't know, Naruto said. This scroll doesn't have much about it. It just talked about it for about a paragraph and went on. Sasuke was quiet and seemed to have retreated into his own thoughts. There was an awkward silence until Naruto turned to Hinata, who still had the Tenchi Byakugan activated. That's really cool, Hinata, he told her. I bet you'll get really super strong. It's true too. At least about the stress, Hinata said. When I activated the normal Byakugan, it always felt like I was straining myself, but this feels really easy. She looked at Naruto and Gaara strangely for a moment. You both have funny seals on you. Gaara didn't look surprised. Naruto looked confused. That keeps the monster inside me, Gaara said matter-of-factly. It wants to get out, so I can't sleep. I don't have a seal, do I? Naruto asked. Yes, it's kinda like Gaara-kun's, but it's different. Both of them are keeping something in them, but I can't really see it, Hinata told them. Maybe Naruto-kun's is keeping a Kekkei Genkai in his, Sakura suggested. That's impossible, Sai said, shaking his head. Well, whatever's in there, Neji said, giving Naruto an odd look. I guess we'll find out one day. Gaara was not the only one who couldn't sleep that night. Sasuke was curled up and his eyes were closed, but sleep didn't come. His mind continued to linger on the words of Uchiha Madara. Was the Uchiha clan truly cursed? He had always been told that the Uchiha were superior to everyone. He had always somehow believed that because of his bloodline he was assured to be great. Suddenly, everything he had been taught was said to be a lie. The Sharingan was a curse, a blot of the face of the earth. It was made only for power, and for those who couldn't care less about anything but power. Was that really true? Was the Mangekyo Sharingan the real secret limit? Did you really have to kill your best friend to get it? Sasuke turned over and received a kick from Neji. Someone was going to murder that guy one day. Were the Uchiha cursed? Was it impossible to use the Sharingan for anything good? The Sharingan was power, Sasuke reasoned. Power was neither good or evil, it simply was. If the Mangekyo Sharingan existed, then that was evil, since it was only obtained through cold-blooded murder. The Sharingan was awakened in battle, when the user's life was in danger. It was nothing or less more than a weapon, but, an unpleasant voice in him reminded, weapons could be used to defend or to murder, but in the end their purpose was the same. The Sharingan was made to kill. Was he cursed? Would he become like his father, like the elders of the clan, no matter what he did? Sasuke didn't know it, but he was taking the first step towards a future decision. The cold air actually hurt as Naruto breathed too fast. His feet bare pounded the snow-covered ground, and occasionally he skidded a little on the ice that covered parts of the street. Naruto's breath hung in the fringed air as he breathed, and mentally, he was annoyed that he lost the heat every time he breathed. Get back here! The angry voice of the vendor reached his ears. Yeah, Naruto thought savagely, like I'm going to stop and let you beat the snot out of me. The 2 large loaves of bread were awkward to carry, and in addition to the scroll tied to his back, he was having trouble moving with the same agility as usual. Why couldn't the man have chased after one of the caged bushin? The group had settled in a village near the border of water country and closer to Kirigakure than Sai would have liked. They tried to move from village to village as much as they could, but things had gotten harder as the weather grew colder. Less people traveled in the winter, and those that did usually didn't have convenient places to stow away. This village wasn't quite so pleasant about their being there as others had been. They had plenty of starving children running around without 7 more to add to the problem. They probably would have run them out of town, if they could have caught them. Thankfully, though learning their jutsus and since they had started sparring with each other to stay warm, they were too good at running away to be caught. There were no ninja in that village. If there had been, all of them would have been caught. Sai said that it had to do with the fact that Kirigakure and the water daimyo were having some sort of disagreement, and both fractions were very distrustful of one another. Naruto turned a tight corner and made another cage bushin to look like it was going straight. Hopefully, the man would chase the clone for a while. He didn't have the usual backup if something went wrong. It seemed that everyone but Gaara and him were sick. It was strange, since Gaara had never been exposed to cold air like this before, but he didn't show any signs of illness. The others were bad and getting worse. Sasuke and Hinata both had high fevers. Sakura complained that she felt like there was a knife in her throat. Sai could barely keep any food down. Neji was showing signs of the chicken pox. Naruto and Gaara took turns sneaking from the alleys that they had made their hiding place and stealing food or rummaging through trash. The other would stay where they were hidden and try to keep Sasuke's fire from going out. Naruto wondered sometimes if they would all live through the winter. He gritted his teeth at the thought and ran faster. Finally, he made it to a small alley that was almost invisible because of the buildings and the trash around it. He paused for a moment, but didn't hear his pursuer's footsteps anywhere. Apparently he had gone after the cage bushin, which would probably disappear after making some form of hostile gesture at the vendor. Naruto sighed in relief and darted down the alley. There was a large heap of snow and trash in one corner that hid the little bubble of sand that Gaara had managed to make for them. Naruto moved a rotting sofa cushion to show a hole large enough for him to crawl through. Trying not to get the loaves any more dirty than necessary, Naruto crawled through and reached out to put the cushion back. Inside, it was a small dome that was lit only by the fire in the center of the room. Around the fire, everyone lay wrapped in ratty, ragged-looking blankets. Gaara was the only one who looked awake. He had a small pile of garbage net to him that looked flammable which he would throw into the fire when he thought it got too low. Since Gaara liked heat, it was a cheerful blaze. It had been a real problem figuring out just how to get a fire in there. The first time that they had tried to light a fire since it had created a ton of smoke and forced Gaara to make a hole in the roof so that they could breathe. Then there had been the problem of the hole letting too much cold air in. It was hard, since if there wasn't enough of a chimney, the smoke would suffocate them, but if it was too large, they would get even sicker. Gaara finally managed a hole that would let enough smoke out to be livable and small enough not to let too much cold air in. "How are they?" Naruto asked. "Neji feels warm now, and Sai hasn't woken up," Gaara mumbled. Naruto sighed and showed him the 2 loaves of bread. "I got food," he said simply. Naruto went around to everyone, shaking them awake and giving them a piece of bread. "I'm so cold," moaned Sasuke when Naruto woke him. Naruto had moved him closer to the fire and given him the bread. Sai blearily looked around and accepted the bread without saying anything. "Are we going to die?" Hinata asked calmly. "No," Naruto assured them, "we're all going to make it through the winter. You're going to get better. No matter what, we're all going to make it through the winter together." They were quiet as they ate their bread. Mostly because they were too weak to talk and eat at the same time. Naruto tried to sound cheerful as he talked to them all, only Gaara really joined in. The others appreciated the mindless chatter, and Naruto knew it. Naruto didn't eat his piece of bread. He was too worried and too upset. He wanted to believe the words he had just said, but so far, from the look of things, Naruto and Gaara were going to be the only ones who saw spring. "I'm going to get some more firewood," Naruto said, getting up and putting the piece of bread in his pocket. "Gaara, can you stay here?" Gaara nodded. They called the garbage that they fed the fire with firewood, even though it was anything but. Mostly it was just pieces of paper. Naruto crawled out the hole and went back into the cold evening. It was rapidly getting dark, and Naruto hugged himself as he walked. What would happen if he or Gaara got sick? How would they get food? Naruto had never been rich. There was a good reason why he ate so much ramen. It was the cheapest food in existence that had some flavor to it. Sometimes he would spend too much money and have to miss quite a few meals. He was no stranger to hunger, but this was different. He had always known that if he really needed something he could go to the old man. Now, all his thoughts were on their next meal, and he had no idea when he would eat again. Naruto wasn't really paying attention to where he was going, and didn't even notice the falling snow. He was too busy thinking about what to do. He didn't notice the large dog sleeping in part of the alley until he had already stepped on it. There was an angry yelp of pain and Naruto found himself staring at an impressive-looking set of very sharp teeth. Naruto did the only thing that came to his mind at that moment. He ran like he had never run before with the dog hot on his tail. Kage Bushin didn't work on dogs since the false Narutos didn't smell, so Naruto was unable to use his usual means of escape. When he was little he had watched a dog chasing a cat and noticed how the dog couldn't catch it because of the sharp turns that it would make. Now he was the one trying to make sharp turns. Already Naruto was starting to feel tired, and his breath was starting to burn in his lungs. He was vaguely aware that the dog was beginning to gain on him, and that his legs were feeling heavy. He dashed past what might have been another person and darted into a side alley. There was a startled yelp, and Naruto turned around in time to see the dog slide past the alley entrance on a sheet of ice that hadn't been there before. Naruto stood in shock for a moment, catching his breath, when he noticed that someone was running towards him. It was a boy about 3 years older than him. He was just as filthy, hungry-looking, and cold as Naruto and the rest. His dark hair was matted and stuck out at odd angles. He was wearing a baggy, oversized white shirt that was in far better shape than his, with a blank collar around his neck. "Are you alright?" he asked, leaning over to check Naruto. "Yeah," he said with a grin, "that thing nearly had me though." "Did you see how that dog got on that ice? I didn't see any ice before. What happened?" The boy started. "I guess you were just lucky. It was there, but somehow you didn't trip." "Well, at least that's lucky," Naruto sighed. "Oh, I'm Uzumaki Naruto." "I'm Akiyama Haku," Haku said politely. "What were you doing out here, Naruto-kun?" "I'm looking for stuff to put in a fire," Naruto told him. "You see, my friend made a fire. But we have to make sure it won't go out, since he might not be able to make another one." "You're with friends?" Haku asked. He was surprised. He would have thought Naruto would have been all alone. A twinge of disappointment hit him. He had vaguely been hoping to help out this kid, but once again, his existence wasn't necessary. "Yeah," Naruto trailed off and then looked up. "Do you know any doctors?" Haku blinked at the question and shook his head. "Oh," Naruto sounded a bit disappointed. "Why? My friends need help," Naruto told him quickly after pausing for a moment and deciding that he needed to talk to someone. "They're sick, and I think they might die. Only me and one other person are healthy, and it keeps getting colder." "Can I see your friends?" Haku asked. "I know a little about medicine." He seemed surprisingly eager to help out. "Really?" Naruto looked hopefully up at him. "Yes," Haku nodded, "my mother taught me." He trailed off and looked at the ground, but Naruto had already grabbed his arm and was proceeding to lead him to their little hut. Haku found himself being dragged along by Naruto. He didn't have any real objection to going, after all, he had been the one to involve himself by making that ice. He had wanted to have someone, anyone, to talk to. Naruto led Haku to a small mound of garbage, only to show him the hole hidden behind the cushion. Haku had to admit that for a group that couldn't be older than 7, this was a very impressive feat. He hadn't thought of it, but when he noticed the sand, he knew that it wouldn't have mattered if he did. He looked around at the huddled forms of the other children and the red-haired boy who was the only one awake. "This is Haku, Gaara. He says he knows stuff about medicine," Naruto told him. "This is Gaara, Haku." Gaara smiled a little, but his eyes fell back on the sleeping figures of the others. "I got some firewood too," Naruto said. "How are they?" "Sakura woke up," Gaara told him. "She got upset that you went out again. She thinks you're going to get sick too." "Nah, no sickness would dare attack the great Uzumaki Naruto," Naruto said, sounding more confident than he looked. Haku ignored the boasting, and came to the conclusion that Naruto was trying to keep his friend's spirits up. Things looked pretty bad for this little group. It was strange, he thought, how there were so many of them. Normally, street children didn't team up like this. They would sometimes make temporary alliances, but they fought over every scrap of food that they got their hands on. Haku had tried on several occasions to team up with other kids who lived like him, but it had never worked. Naruto pointed at the sleeping forms of the other children. "Is there a way we can help?" Naruto asked him. Haku leaned over all of them in turn. Remembering what his mother told him, he put a hand on each of their foreheads in turn, felt Sakura's throat for swollen glands, and tried to get Sai to stay away long enough to ask him how he felt. They're almost at a point where the only thing that would help is hospitalization. Haku told him they need medical herbs. Badly. Where are some? Naruto asked. Hospital, Gaara says suddenly. My sister once got really sick and they had to get special herbs from the hospital greenhouse to help her. Naruto and Haku looked at Gaara and at each other. There's a hospital near that marketplace. I bet it has some. Naruto exclaimed and turned to Haku. Gaara, you could use your sand to help Haku and I up, and we could steal the herbs. Naruto paused and looked at Haku a little embarrassed. That is, if you want to help us. I'll help, Haku told him. I know the herbs that would work best. I think that they could have them, they're not that rare. Haku was surprised that things were moving so fast, but he knew just why he was helping them out. For the first time since his mother's murder, he had seen people who were like him. Each and every one of them had looked at him, and he had seen that they all had the same eyes as his. Eyes that were determined to prove their existence, and force others to acknowledge it. It was late by the time that the three made it to the hospital. They had had to make sure that the fire had enough fuel to burn for an hour or so while they were gone, and they had managed to get lost quite a few times. None of them were that familiar with the town, so occasionally, a wrong turn was taken. Naruto barely had any sense of direction. Haku and Gaara fared slightly better, but they would sometimes get confused by the side alleys. The other problem was that there were a few mist nen that sometimes patrolled at night, and while they wouldn't really catch the notice of them, they were afraid of being seen and later associated with the soon-to-be robbery. There were several near misses, and once, when a particularly fearsome-looking ninja with a large sword and most of his face covered was walking past the alley they were hiding in, Haku took a step back that nearly sent him crashing into a garbage can. Naruto stared up at the hospital, praying that whatever medical herbs were needed to help his friends were there. Okay, Gaara, do you think you can do it? Naruto asked. Naruto had explained to Haku on the way that Gaara could manipulate sand. Haku had been quiet, almost like he was thinking of something. Naruto hoped that Haku wasn't going to show any fear of him. Gaara had improved considerably over the few months. He didn't seem quite so afraid that at one misstep they would all hate him. He also seemed to be more comfortable with his control over sand. Because he was with people who didn't fear him, he started to try to use the sand at will. He was slowly getting better and better. Gaara had started to use the sand to pick things up a while ago, but he had never tried to do that to a person before tonight. I think so, Gaara said. If anything goes wrong, I should have time to put you back down. Let's hope so, Haku found himself saying. Yeah, Naruto nodded. Gaara, promise me something. What? If there's a chance that you're losing control, put us down. Gaara, if anything, looked more nervous at that request. I'll try, he mumbled. Okay, Naruto said, let's go. Gaara closed his eyes and concentrated. Thankfully, they had learned that to Gaara's ability, all dirt was sand. There was plenty of dirt around this village, so Gaara didn't have to strain too much as he began to make the dirt around Naruto and Haku's feet congeal around their feet and slowly lift them up. Naruto felt nervous and refused to look down as the ground slowly grew further and further away from him. He had the feeling that if he did look, he would probably start begging Gaara to put him back down. The hospital roof grew closer and closer. Just to keep his mind off of the thought of the ground and just how much it would hurt to fall from that height, he tried to remember what Haku had told him. The hospital would have the entrance to the greenhouse on the first floor somewhere. Since they were going through the roof, they were going to have go down 3 floors to get to it, and then go back up 3 floors just to get back to Gaara. The fact that they were most likely going to be caught hadn't occurred to Naruto. Naruto and Haku jumped off at the side of the roof siding there. Naruto stood at the edge and gave Gaara the thumbs up to show that they were okay. He turned around and looked for any obvious way they could get in. There was no door on the roof or anything else that was large enough for an adult to get in or out. There were some small pipes jetting out at odd angles, and a heating vent, but nothing that would be easy. Naruto had half been expecting a door of some kind that they would be able to use, but since there wasn't one, he would have to think of another way. What about the vent? Haku suggested, pointing at it. It looks big enough for the 2 of us to go though. Yeah, that'll work, Naruto said, nodding. Okay, I'll help you up, and go in after you. Naruto nodded and was supported by Haku as he tried to remove the vent cover. It was screwed tight and no effort of his was able to move it at all. After almost 15 minutes, Naruto paused to catch his breath and stare at his raw, red hands. Haku seemed to be alright supporting him, at least he hadn't said anything yet, but he did twitch as he rested. Sorry, Naruto told him, thinking that he was tired and a little irritated that he had to carry him. I needed a break. I can go again now. He was shocked when with one tug, the cover came off neatly, but he wasn't too shocked to notice that the inside had frozen and had somehow actually broken the screws. He was somehow reminded of the dog that had been chasing him and how it had suddenly tripped on ice that had just appeared. Looks like there's a Yuki Onna who likes me, Naruto told Haku, grinning. Haku gave him a nervous smile and whispered for him to go on. Naruto crawled through the entrance and began to make his way down the passage. It was pitch black in there, and the metal was so cold that it almost burned his hands at first. Naruto had to remind himself over and over again that if he didn't do this, Sasuke, Sakura, Hinata, Neji, and Sai would all die. The first shock was when the tunnel suddenly turned into a sharp drop. He slid down for about 5 feet and about a second later heard the surprised gasp of Haku doing the same. The tunnel leveled off a little and turned into a slide for a while. By the time it had become straight, Naruto had no idea just how far down he had gone, but the force that Haku bumped into him showed that it had been a shorter time than he had thought. Are you okay? Naruto whispered into the darkness. Yes, Haku's voice replied from behind him. The drop scared me a bit though. Naruto crawled towards a spot where the darkness of the tunnel didn't seem quite so thick. Only after reaching it and staring at the horizontal slits for a while did he realize that he was inside the air vent looking in at a dark room. He couldn't see anything in it other than the drawn curtains and the forms of a bed and some equipment. It looked completely deserted. Naruto started to push the vent cover as hard as he could, but he was startled when the cover came off with a loud pop. Yata, Naruto whispered. Both boys crawled out slowly, not thinking that if there had been anyone nearby, the sound of the cover coming off would have already gotten their attention. What are you doing? A soft, unemotional voice said. Naruto and Haku jumped and whirled around. They couldn't quite see the person in the faint light of the room, but they could tell that whoever it was a tall, slender person dressed in something that looked like a baggy shirt that covered their hands. From the voice, Naruto guessed that the person was a girl. Cleaning the air ducts? Naruto said. The second that they were out of his mouth, he knew the words sounded stupid. Haku must have been thinking something similar, because he looked very strangely at Naruto. The truth, the person said. For the first time in his life, Naruto felt killing intent. It was a sickening feeling that hung in the air and penetrated everything. Naruto didn't really understand what it was, but he took an unconscious step back, Haku doing the same. Haku began in a defeated voice. The tone sent a feeling of rage into Naruto. He had seen the murder of the Hokage, he had almost been killed by a sand nin, and he had been, almost single-handedly, keeping 5 people alive for 2 weeks. There was no way that he was going to cower before anyone, let alone some mysterious woman who that didn't know anything about. We're gonna get medicine for our friends, Naruto said angrily, and you're not gonna stop me. The woman was silent for a moment, but the oppressive feeling in the air died away. Your friends, what are they to you? The woman asked. Everything, Naruto hissed, they're the people who acknowledged my existence. Haku once again looked at Naruto strangely, this time it was a look of understanding, and a little jealousy. There was another silence after that statement. Finally, the person moved away, turning their back towards them. There's a plant in the conservatory downstairs that has black flowers with red tips. It will cure most diseases, but it is difficult to get and use. Boil the petals of the flower for exactly 60 seconds. Take the petals out and give the water to your friends. The medicine is extremely strong and if you do not follow those instructions, your friends will die. Do you understand? Yes, Haku whispered. You will not speak of meeting me. With these words the woman simply dissolved into what looked like little particles that shot through the cracks in the windows of the room. For a moment, Haku and Naruto stood, frozen, staring at where the woman had been, but their wits came back quickly when they thought that they heard footsteps. Both children hid behind a door as the sound neared. This is his room, a man's voice said. Remember, no one is allowed in there until tomorrow. There are ninja coming in the morning to interrogate him. Thankfully, no one knows he's here or else we would have to have more security than ever. Yes, sir, a cool woman's voice replied. The cameras went out today again. Just to tell you, the man continued. Oh, and remember to get someone to clean up that mess in the hall of the first floor. Someone will slip on all that water. Yes, sir. The conversation and the footsteps faded into another hall, and Naruto felt himself slowly relax. After waiting 5 minutes, both dashed to the door and opened it a crack. There was a sleeping nurse in a chair next to the door, but nothing else seemed dangerous to them. Slowly, making sure not to wake up the nurse, the two boys opened the door and crept out into the hall. The nurse grunted a little and twitched in her sleep, which made the two jump, but when she didn't move again, they walked slowly down the hall. The stairs weren't that hard to find, and truthfully, Naruto felt a little better on them. The fact that they were in an enclosed area where he could hear everything made him feel somewhat better. If someone was coming, he would know. The person might know that someone had been there, but if they ducked into one of the hallways, no one would know who had been there. No one met them on the way down. This is weird, Haku said quietly to Naruto. Shouldn't we have heard something by now? Naruto shrugged. He had never been in a hospital much, other than when it was absolutely necessary. The first floor seemed just as deserted as the rest of the hospital. It was strange, they had only seen 4 people, counting the freaky woman, there. A nagging voice in Naruto's head, that had been coming up more and more often, told him that there was something wrong, and that they should be as careful as they could. A directory near the stairs told them that they would have to pass the reception desk to make it to the greenhouse. Haku had given Naruto a worried look, but Naruto had charged ahead with a determined look on his face. It was strange how he looked so much older with it. The desk was empty. This time Naruto knew there was something very wrong. This was way too convenient. Cautiously, he made his way to the desk and looked over. A young woman with blonde hair lay sleeping, a split glass of water next to it. Haku picked the glass and looked at it. There's something wrong with it, he said. Drugs, Naruto said, remembering something from Iruka's long, dull lectures. Some ninja like to use them. Let's get the stuff and get out of here, Haku said nervously. He had never had any real experience with a ninja before, other than the horror stories that his father had told him. Both threw caution to the winds, and dashed along the corridor. When they reached a set of double doors with a sign, Greenhouse. Medics only, they were out of breath and very edgy. Naruto threw the 2 doors open, but paused to stare at the inside of the greenhouse. It looked more like a miniature forest than anything else. The air felt warm, and somehow fresh, and there was even a light breeze moving through. Naruto had the sudden urge to curl up in a ball, fall asleep and hope to wake up at the academy because Iruka-sensei had thrown the chalk stick at him again for sleeping. Instead he looked around for a black and red flower. This is it, he heard Haku call over. He was leaning over a large, strange-looking flower. It was solid black with red edges, the stem and leaves were a silvery green, and there was something completely otherworldly about it. There were a few others growing nearby, but none seemed as big as this one. Naruto reached out for the stem, but Haku shook his head. The woman said that we only needed the petals. We'll leave the rest of it here, he told Naruto, his usually passive voice taking on a harder quality. Alright. Naruto was surprised at his reaction to the flower. After all, it was a plant. Haku had just taken off the flower head when the door of the greenhouse opened to show a very upset-looking nurse. She and the 2 thieves stared at each other for a split second that seemed to last for an eternity, then everything happened at once. The nurse ran forwards to catch them. Naruto and Haku dashed by on either side of her, the door opened again, and a doctor, who had just opened the door, was knocked over by the 2 escaping children. What was that? The stunned doctor's question was ignored as the nurse flew past him. There was no time to think of running back upstairs. There had to be a back door to his hospital somewhere. They would find Gaara and get back to safety. Naruto didn't have a clue where he was going. In fact, he only really noticed anything other than that they were being chased was when his feet hit the water. He vaguely remembered the mention of a spill on the first floor. Haku, Naruto yelled, change the water into ice. What but, Haku began. I know you can do it. You don't care? Haku sounded shocked. About my Kekkei Genkai? This is a stupid time to ask. There was a startled cry behind them and Naruto turned his head around to see the woman slipping on the water, which had suddenly become ice. As they turned a sharp corner towards the back door, Naruto saw the nurse rise to continue after them, but the sharp voice of the head doctor stopped her. Don't worry about them, they're just a distraction. I need you to get upstairs, right now. The special patient was murdered. The cold air outside felt awful after running that much. Both boys stood in the back of the hospital gasping for breath, and when a sudden movement at the entrance caught their attention, both boys prayed that it was nothing, since they wouldn't have been able to run anymore. Are you alright? The soft, worried voice of Gaara asked. Gaara, Naruto gasped, what are you doing here? I got worried, so I came to help, Gaara told them. Do you have the medicine? Naruto looked at Haku, hoping against hope that he hadn't dropped it. Haku slowly held up one hand, with the crushed flower petals in it. Yata, Naruto cheered, that's great. You knew about my? Haku began. Yeah, Naruto said, since the vent. I guessed with the god, but I wasn't sure. That's really cool that you can do that. You think so? Haku asked. Naruto nodded. I can't wait to tell Sasuke about tonight and introduce you. He's going to be so jealous he couldn't see it. You want me to come back with you? Haku was stunned. Was his existence really wanted? Of course, Gaara said with a small smile. Everyone will want to meet you since you worked so hard to help them. Let's go, Naruto said. His impatience was obvious. I want to try this stuff out. A small smile formed on Haku's lips as he silently followed what would soon become 2 of the 8 people who he would do anything for. Hey, Sasuke, pass it here. Naruto yelled as the other boy threw a small air-filled balloon that had been pilfered from one of the many booths in the area. Water County's Spring Festival apparently was a major event. All the villages were holding one. With all the tourists and travelers from other counties and districts, it was no wonder that 8 filthy children were able to blend into the crowd. Naruto and his friends had gone from filthy to a new level of dirt. They were unrecognizable from the children who had escaped Konoha by night. Their hair had reached a uniform brownish-gray color, and it had become impossible to tell whether one of them was male or female. With filthy faces, ragged, ripped, and torn clothes and long matted hair, they had become a standard example of the common street urchin. Actually, Naruto had the feeling that it was the best thing in the world for them to be like this. This way no one even saw them. They had become a little bolder about the passing ninja. They didn't even seem to see the children that would watch them warily. If they were still being searched for, no one would look at a group of half-starved, half-naked children. The festival was a welcome change. The milling crowds dropped many things. Food, money, and even toys on occasion. The very balloon that they were playing with had been thrown away by a screaming child because he didn't weight it anymore. The second that it had hit the ground, Neji had come out of nowhere, grabbed it, and dashed into the crowd amid the wails of the child, who suddenly wanted the toy since someone else had it now. Sasuke, Neji, and Naruto were using it at the moment, and were looking for the others. Sai had gone towards the game booths, probably to see if any overzealous person threw a disc too hard and ended up dropping their barbecued squid or their candy. Sakura and Hinata were hiding in amidst the vendors, looking for anything that had been dropped or a way to steal something. It was amazing just how much they thought about food. Naruto, Sasuke, and Neji's little game was a rarity. Most of the time they thought of 3 things: food, shelter, and the fact that winter was coming. After their little trip to the hospital, Naruto began to worry more and more about what would happen next winter. Maybe they wouldn't get so lucky, and with 8 of them, it was completely impossible to hitch a ride to the next country, and security had become tight ever since Konoha had invaded Iue a month ago. Living the dream of being free from parents and authority was more like living a nightmare that was unending. Every day they woke up and wondered if they would eat, every night they huddled up together and wondered if they would be killed in their sleep. So many things that Naruto had taken for granted were now so important. Like money. People spent it so easily and on such stupid things. Like that woman was ever going to want that coffee mug with that stupid-looking picture of a fat man dancing around with 2 fans. Naruto watched her give the money to a smirking man and thought of the bowl of ramen that would have bought. His stomach growled at the thought. Sakura hid underneath the large wooden booth and hoped that the vendor hadn't seen her hide there. She had been sneaking from booth to booth for about 2 hours. This one, she had noticed, had a tendency to drop things. Her life had taken such a turn that she doubted that she would know herself from last fall. She had been such a crybaby. While she was still sensitive about her forehead, it was more of a violent sensitivity that resulted in the person who had hurt her being punched. Some sadistic part of her longed to meet Amy again just so that she could get her for every forehead joke. A woman in an expensive-looking green kimono walked up to the man. 2 origiri, she ordered. Sakura's stomach rumbled. Coming up, the man said, "You're from around Kirigakure, right?" "Thought so. Have the Kagaya been causing trouble?" Same old, the woman said with a sigh. That clan always seems on the verge of causing some sort of battle. It's only a matter of time until they do something stupid like attack. I never have understood what they're being left alone for, the vendor said. He sounded like he was trying to get some information. You're poking your nose where it's going to be bitten off, old man, the woman said in a level tone. I just want to know if the story of the treasure is true, the vendor said indignantly. That the Kagaya have a king's ransom stored off somewhere? The woman asked. Well, that would explain why they haven't been killed off. They don't know anything else in Kiri? The man sounded disappointed. No, but I am returning home on the North Road. It takes you directly past their district. I'm sure you could come and see for yourself. The woman's voice had a bit of malice in it. A large origiri fell to the floor, and Sakura snatched it up. You idiot, the woman said calmly, and what is this? The cloth that protected Sakura from being seen was lifted and a 30-or-so-year-old woman surveyed her. I hope this gaki isn't yours, the woman said without changing her tone. What gaki? The vendor leaned over and started at her. He aimed a kick for Sakura but missed. Sakura grabbed her origiri and dashed off, looking back in time to make a rude face. If I ever see you again near my booth, you'll get beaten to within an inch of your life. The man yelled after here. Are those common here? Was the last thing that Sakura heard the woman ask. She clutched the origiri tightly and wove through the crowds. The talk of the treasure and king's ransoms made her exited. Sakura didn't know what a king's ransom was, but she knew that kings ate every day, and got to bathe as much as they wanted, and didn't have to worry about what would happen when winter came. A king's ransom would have to be a lot of money. Sakura couldn't wait to tell everyone what she had just learned. What have you got? Gaara asked. It was evening, which meant time to show off what had been pilfered. Everyone sat in one of Gaara's sand domes. It was warm, so there was no need for a fire, but they still sat close together. Gaara had been the first to produce findings which consisted of 3 sticks of fried squid, and a large dumpling. I got a rubber ball, something that looks edible but was stepped on by someone, and a stick of dango with 2 of the dango on it, Neji told them. I've got a tomato, a fried fish on a stick that someone took a bite of and dropped, and bag with some candy in it, Sasuke said proudly. I was allowed to take some vegetables that the vendor didn't want to sell because they looked old, Haku said with a smile. I got a bag with Ryu in it, Naruto said waving it around. How did you get that? Hinata asked, looking amazed. Some guys were playing a game where they rolled dice and bet on what they got, and I found 2 Ryu and joined them. They thought it was funny, so they let me play. They didn't think it was funny when I won, Naruto told them, feeling rather proud of being able to help support his family. I managed to get into a barbecue place, Sai told them. His face was blank, but his tone seemed pleased. I managed to get a lot in a napkin before they found me. I didn't manage to get anything today, Hinata mumbled, sorry. Don't worry about it. Sasuke didn't manage to get anything for a week straight, remember, Naruto reminded her. Sasuke glared over at Naruto. What? It was your fault you kept going to that tomato vendor. You're lucky he didn't do more than smack your hand when you tried to grab one. I'd like to see you do better, Dobi. Naruto tackled him, and both began rolling around on the floor, trying to hit each other. You know, Haku told them, it's really nice to see how much you care about each other. What? Sai asked, looking confused. Well, it's strange, but I think that it's their strange way of telling each other how much they care, Haku said thoughtfully. I hope they never care about me that much. Neji muttered, it looks too painful. Gaara nodded in silent agreement. Sai looked confused but kept his thoughts to himself. I heard something, Sakura said, knowing by this time that Sasuke and Naruto and their weird little friendship, rivalry could go on for hours, where I was hiding under one of the tables. What's that? Sasuke asked, looked up from the headlock that Naruto had gotten him into, and removing his fingers from up Naruto's nose. Well, get your fingers out of Naruto's nose and I'll tell you, Sakura said irritably. Sasuke mumbled something inaudible. I heard that there was a treasure around here. Sakura said excitedly, leaning forwards, and it's worth a whole lot. The vendor said something about a king's ransom, and they said that a clan had it. What clan? Sai asked. I think that it was something like Kuguta, Sakura said, looking thoughtful. Sai sat up very quickly. His face had the first look of shock that he had ever shown in his life. Normally, Naruto would have patted him on the back and congratulated him, but something told him that it wasn't the time for jokes. His eyes had gotten surprisingly wide. The Kagaya clan? He asked. Yeah, I think that was it, Sakura nodded. You know about them? Yes, Sai said, they are a very dangerous clan in this area. They are all very militant and brutal. Thankfully, they are disorganized and there is a lot of infighting with them. The Kagaya complex is said to be an underground maze. They used to have a Kekkei Genkai, but it died out. It was a good thing for both Konoha and Kiri. The Kagaya have no loyalties to anyone, and lately they've been constantly threatening to revolt against the Kiri and take it over. But I never heard that they had any money, let alone being rich. Well, maybe they just hide it really well, Neji muttered. Anyways, it's worth looking at. Not really, Sai muttered, they're vicious, and none of us can fight that well. Don't be such a scaredy cat, Naruto said, we'll be fine. So you want to go look for it? Gaara asked. Naruto wasn't quite sure what to say to that question. Yes, he wanted to see if there was any way for them to escape the world that they were in, and no, he didn't want to put anyone's life in danger. The time that he, Gaara and Haku had snuck into the hospital was an emergency. They would live a little longer if they didn't go on this treasure hunt. Only until winter comes again, a nasty, unpleasant thought came up. When winter comes, we'll all die. Yes, Naruto said, you said that their place is like a maze. Well, we'll only take a little of the treasure, and if we're really careful, I bet they won't catch us. Naruto's confidence seemed to reassure the others, but he wasn't reassured. How he to know what was going to happen? Blast it, he didn't even know how to find this place, let alone find treasure. They needed money so badly thought, and somehow, if these people did kill them, it would be better than a slow death that they were likely to face here. Where is this place? Hinata asked. It's about an hour's walk from Kiri, Haku told them. That woman said she was going on the North Road. I know where that is. Haku was been accepted into the family before he had known it. He had been careful about giving the medicine, and had tried to be as friendly as he could. His already kind and gentle disposition made it impossible for even Sasuke, easily the most suspicious of the group, not to like him. He had been on the streets longer than they had, and hadn't had others there to share his pain, until they had all accepted him, and acknowledged his existence. Haku saw them all as more than family. They were quickly becoming his precious people. Although, it might have been against his better judgment to do this, he would help in any way he could. Besides, he could tell just how much they really needed money. I can show you. Naruto was going to murder Neji one of these nights. That guy seemed to be magnetically attracted to any person near him. It was even worse since they had started to huddle together. No one mentioned Neji's kicking to him anymore, except for Sai, who whenever he was asked how he slept he would reply that he would have slept better if he hadn't been kicked every 5 minutes by a Hyuga who was dreaming of murdering his uncle. Neji always denied having kicked anyone and tried to blame Naruto. That didn't work since Naruto had his own bad habit of drooling, and everyone knew it. They had camped out after walking for another day. It had been 3 days since they had left the festival. There were no carts coming by, and it seemed that the North Road was completely deserted. Haku said that it was normal, since people didn't like to pass too close to the Kagaya district. For some reason, this did nothing to make Naruto feel better about this decision. Maybe a slow death would have been a better idea after all. Neji, Naruto said when he felt the foot hit him again. I know that you're a light enough sleeper to hear me. If you kick me one more time, I'm going to bite you. Neji kicked Sasuke. I hate all of you, Sasuke grumbled. Can we just walk? Sai asked. I don't think any of us are sleeping other than Neji-kun, and that isn't helping us. I got a better idea, Sakura grumbled. She was surprisingly bad-tempered when she woke up. The shy girl had all but disappeared other than the thin varnish that she tried to keep up so that she could still be considered a lady. Let's tie up Neji-kun and gag him. Sakura? Hinata mumbled, that won't help, he might start kicking you. He wouldn't, she started. He would, 3 guys mumbled. I could encase him in sand until you got to sleep, Gaara, always wanting to be helpful, suggested. Would you please stop talking about me like I'm either not here or can't understand you, Neji growled. Stop kicking, Neji. Naruto, Sasuke, and Sakura yelled. I think that just alerted every possible danger in 5 miles that were here, Sai told them. Shut up, Sasuke grumbled, irritated that his Uchiha cool had been lost. I think that it might be a good idea to continue going on, Hiku said thoughtfully. We're all away, and the Kagaya clan wouldn't be as active at night. I think we're close to their home too. Good, Sasuke grumbled, this better be enough treasure to make my family look poor. I just want enough to take a bath, Hinata mumbled. Thank actually sounds nice, Gaara, who seemed to have a slight phobia of water, said. There were nods and dreamy looks from everyone. So many things that had been taken for granted were now dreamed of longingly. Walking at night in the middle of a water country was not a fun thing to do. Not only did they all know for a fact that there was constant civil war and there was a good chance of getting killed by some kunai-happy ninja, but there were a ton of bandits who took advantage of the chaos. Normally, no one bother a group of kids. Not out of kindness, but because they had nothing that anyone wanted. There was still plenty of danger, but they were able to go places that few in their right minds would even think of going near at night. Actually, Naruto thought that the forest around this place was truly deserted. He and the others were getting fairly good at sensing the presence of other people, but he didn't feel anyone or anything. Even a lot of bigger animals didn't seem to be there. Naruto wondered what had scared them off. Sasuke, who had been in the middle of the little group, dropped back to Naruto, who was at the end. Hey, Naruto, Sasuke whispered, have you noticed? Yeah, it's really creepy. Do you think that the Kagaya have anything to do with it? Maybe, but who, or what, would make all the animals run away? They have a bloodline, right? But it's extinct. Sasuke shook his head. Naruto, Kekkei Genkai don't go extinct. They water down, and they don't appear in people sometimes, or they don't activate, but they're always there. No one knows what they are or where they came from, but they will always exist in the families that have them. Nothing can change that. That's what the scroll Itachi gave me says, and I think it's right. All of it, and I think Neji's right. Sasuke looked away at that time, his eyes were dark and frightened. Naruto looked at him blankly, but then he realized what he was talking about, all those months ago when Hinata had found out about the Tenshi Byakugan. The Uchiha family's supposed to cursed, right? Naruto said, sounding like he was talking out of the blue. Well, if they are, it's because they don't try to stop it. I mean, this Mangekyo Sharingan can only be gotten by killing your best friend. What if there's another way to get it? The Uchiha either ignore the idea of the curse or they go with it. Why not find a way to fight it? It's kinda like a big lion. If you ignore it, it'll eat you anyways, and if you try to join it, it'll play with you for a while, then eat you. What if you try to kill it? You may get eaten still, but you still fought it, right? And who knows, maybe Susanoo really just wanted to set a trap to get rid of people who would misuse power. After all, you're an Uchiha, and you might be a jerk sometimes, but you're still my best friend, and I don't like evil people so. Naruto knew that he was rambling. He had found a sort of idea, but it had faded into blather towards the end. But Sasuke was smiling at Naruto, one of his rare actual smiles. Thanks, Sasuke mumbled. I mean it, I guess you're not the total doby I used to think you were, but I'm still cooler. Naruto started to laugh. A friendship, rivalry that would soon be the stuff of legends had begun. Oh, look at the mighty Kagaya district, Neji said sardonically. It looks like the Dread family has fallen on hard times. It doesn't look like there's a treasure, Sai agreed. A large, squat, square wooden building sat in the faint light from the crescent moon. Pieces of it were rotten and starting to fall off the walls. There were no windows that they could see, in fact the small door in the front was the only opening in that building. It was probably only a wall, but Naruto was feeling worse every minute. He was starting to learn the downside of leadership. Everything was his fault. They had left a festival where they would have at least had food to chase after an imaginary treasure. Well, since we're here, let's see if we can get in. Naruto said lamely. For some reason there didn't seem to be any guards around the building, which considering the reputation of being very militant and rebellious, it didn't seem to make all that much sense. Naruto would have expected to have had to sneak up on the place, but it seemed almost abandoned. Something told Naruto that he should tell them all to forget it and leave, but Naruto had never listened to his sane side all that much before, and he wasn't going to start now. They wandered around the building about 3 times looking for a way in. Nothing seemed to work. The walls that they might be able to scale looked like they couldn't hold their weight, the door was completely out of the question, and there weren't any windows. They were about to give up when Sai noticed the irregularity in one of the walls. Hinata and Neji activated their Byakugan and confirmed that it looked like it had been some sort of escape route. "It looks like it hasn't been used for a really long time," Hinata said thoughtfully. "I don't see any past chakra signatures." Hinata had learned that the Tenchi Byakugan could also see where people had been. It wasn't a very useful ability in many ways, which might have been why it wasn't mentioned, but it had its place. "How do you open it?" Sakura asked. "Should we just hit it until it falls over?" "I could break it down with my sand," Gaara suggested. "Or we could try to do something that wouldn't attract everyone's attention," Neji suggested. "That might be a good idea," Sai said with a bright smile. Sakura glared at both of them. "What do you think we should do?" she asked in an annoyed-sounding voice. "Feel around for something that looks like a switch," Sasuke said like it was obvious. Sakura glared over at him too, which made Sasuke's self-confident look waver just a bit. Hinata sighed. "Stop it," she said in a bored tone. "Neji-Nisan, you know better." Neji looked somewhat embarrassed, but not really. "Let's do Sasuke's idea," Naruto suggested as if nothing had happened. For the next 10 minutes, they pressed a wall and tried to feel anything that seemed like it had once been a switch. Hinata and Neji, Byakugan activated, both tried to direct them to a switch, but it was difficult to do. Haku got an impressive amount of slivers and Gaara began to try to use small parts of sand to press parts of the wall that they couldn't reach. Sai began to draw little ink mice to see if they could go through any cracks in the walls and trip the switch from the inside. In the end, Naruto found the door by chance when he punched the wall in irritation and nearly killed himself when the door snapped open. "Don't say it," Naruto said angrily, seeing the looks on his friends' faces. "Don't even think it." "I'm thinking it," Sasuke told him. Naruto muttered something that he had heard the soldiers that he had been gambling with say to him when he had won, and stood up. He was standing in a corridor that would have been very dark if it hadn't been for the shaft of moonlight that came from the door that they had opened. From what Naruto could see, the hallway went on into darkness in both directions. There seemed to be some doors and what might have been a door to another hallway to his left. There seemed to be an unlit torch above them, beyond his reach. "Hey, Gaara, can you get that torch down?" Naruto asked. Gaara nodded and the sand that seemed to always collect on his skin drifted over to the torch and wrapped around it. Slowly, probably because Gaara was being careful not to drop it, the torch came to Naruto's level. "Guess what, Sasuke?" Naruto asked with a grin. Sasuke smirked and his hands formed a now familiar pattern. "Kaden. Gukakyu no Jutsu," he said calmly. A small torrent of fire came from his mouth and lit the torch. "Cha!" Sakura cheered. "Let's go get that treasure." "I want pearls." Hinata joined in excitedly. She was so different than the shy, stuttering girl that Naruto had met that night, "but we have to get it first. Then we can divide it all. If there is any," Neji muttered darkly. "You know," Haku said thoughtfully, "even if there isn't any treasure, there's food here, and lots of other things I bet." They all stared at him. "You're evil," Naruto said admiringly. "No, I'm not," Haku denied. "I was just thinking that we need these things more than they do. And maybe we can steal some more scrolls too." "He's a closet evil mastermind," Naruto whispered to Hinata, who nodded. Haku looked very uncomfortable at the awestruck looks of his friends. "It was just a suggestion," he said raising his hands. "We don't have to." "I like it," Gaara said nodding. "Me too," was the response from everyone. "Let's do Haku's evil plan," Hinata said with a smile. "It wasn't meant to be." Haku mumbled, but stopped when he saw everyone marching off and walked after them. Naruto and the rest walked down the corridor for what seemed like an hour but was probably only about 15 minutes. There were no doors or windows, and the only light came from the torches. Naruto thought that it looked like a scene in one of the horror movies that the landlord had forced him to watch ever since he was 4. Because of that twit, Naruto was still afraid of ghosts. This looked like the perfect place to find one too, with the dim shadows and the flickering light of the torch that they had found. Finally, they reached a 4-way cross. A long stairway went up one way and down the next. Because treasure was usually to be found underground, the group wordlessly went towards the downward stairway. Several other hallways branched off from the stairway, and somehow, Naruto felt like they weren't going all that far down. The Kuguya building seemed to be on a hill. It was strange, Naruto noticed, no one was here. There were no guards. Were they so sure that they were in no danger that had just stopped guarding the place, or was it something worse? The stairway ended at a small door. There was a large lock on it and it seemed to be fairly well frequented. 8 pairs of eyes looked hopefully at one another. This is it, Naruto whispered. Gaara, use your sand and break the lock. The floor, which seemed to be made of dirt, seemed to shift as some of it began to drift towards the lock and fill it. There was a crack and something inside the lock broke. Neji took it off and he and Haku opened the door. It was another hallway, but this was different from the others. It looked like it had been carved out from rock a long time ago, and candles burned in old sockets giving the whole place a creepy look. But the thing that made the hair on the back of Naruto's neck rise was the sound of something down the hall, tapping. It's a ghost, Naruto whispered. There's no such thing as ghosts, Sai whispered back. Says who? Naruto hissed. Danzo, Sai shot back. Good thing for him there aren't, Sasuke muttered. Slowly, and not quite convinced that there was no ghost at the other end, Naruto led them into the room. It was hard to see much in front of him because of the twists and turns, but the tapping was growing louder. Naruto wondered if maybe it was a guard for the treasure. At last, they say something up ahead. Naruto walked faster. It looked like door, but where those bars? Why you're not treasure, Naruto said stupidly at the boy sitting behind the bars. He was pale, with long white hair that was tied in a loose ponytail, much like Neji. He looked about Haku's age. His pale clothes and his pale hair and skin made him almost look like a ghost, but 2 things really caught Naruto's attention. The first were the 2 red circular marks on his forehead, and the second were his gray-blue eyes. They were so empty. Who are you? The boy asked. His voice was hoarse and it didn't sound like he used it much. Haku began. What are you doing in there? Hinata asked, looking upset. Who put you in there? The boy looked at her blankly. I don't know, he said. I've always been here. Who are you? I'm Uzumaki Naruto, Naruto said hurriedly. This is Uchiha Sasuke. Haruno Sakura. Hyuga Neji. Hyuga Hinata. Sai. Gaara. And Akiyama Haku. The boy was silent for a few minutes while the rest stared at him. Finally he seemed to understand that they were waiting for him to say something. I'm Kagaya Kimimaro, he said softly, almost as if shocked that they were holding a conversation at all. Kagaya, Neji said, looking shocked. Why would the Kuguya lock up one of their own children? I don't know, Kimimaro said quietly. I think they're afraid of me. Why? Hinata asked, talking a step forward, smiling a little. For the first time, Naruto noticed that the boy was holding something long and white. At first he thought that it was some kind of stick or root, but then he realized. That's a bone, he said, pointing at it. What are you doing with that bone? Kimimaro didn't seem to have any problem with all these questions. Actually, Naruto got the feeling that he was somewhere between shock and euphoria. Shock that they were strange people who had just appeared out of nowhere and were questioning him, and euphoria that there was someone who wasn't seeing right through him. I made it, he said simply. What? Naruto, Sasuke, and Haku asked together. That's the Kekkei Genkai of the Kagaya clan, Sai said, looking interestedly at Kimimaro. It's called Shikatsu Myaku, and it allows the user to manipulate their bone structure at will as well as use them as weapons, and not suffer from bone damage. No one knows where it came from. I thought that it had died. Kekkei Genkai don't die, Sasuke muttered. It's not fair. Naruto turned to see Haku was the one who had shouted. That was strange enough, since Haku didn't seem able to raise his voice, but he looked furious and his hands were balled into fists. No matter what, it's all the same, he whispered. People are afraid of people with power or they just try to control them. It's not fair, we didn't ask to have power. People have no right to hate us. We're not monsters, we're just different. You have powers too? Kimimaro asked. His eyes had widened and hope was glowing in them. He wasn't alone, there were people like him. Yeah, Sasuke told him, all of us have powers. Let's let him out, Naruto said suddenly, no one should be trapped here. And he had the same eyes that Haku had had before he had joined them. So empty and determined to prove their existence and its worth. Neji Nisan and I should be able to break though it, Hinata suggested. Naruto nodded. Both Hyuga stood on opposite sides of the wooden grate with their Byakugan active. Just like we've practiced, Neji told her, you'll be fine. Hinata smiled a little. I'm already not as afraid as I used to be, she told him. Alright, Jayukin? Neji and Hinata called out as they both struck the grate. They cut through the wood without much trouble or noise, not that there was anyone to hear. The grate collapsed in on itself. Kimimaro watched them in silent shock. His mind seemed to be registering that a group of perfect strangers had just popped up out of nowhere and let him out. He looked between the group and the wreckage of the grate. His face didn't show much emotion but his eyes were wide. You're free, Naruto said with a smile. You can come with us, stay here, or whatever. Free? Kimimaro repeated, I can come with you. Yeah, Sasuke muttered, that's what he said. You don't have to be alone anymore, Hinata said with a smile. Kimimaro stood up and took a step forwards across the remains of the grate to the group. The circle was complete. Jackpot, Naruto whispered as he stared into the room. It wasn't treasure, but it was something almost as good. The small storage room on the level above Kimimaro's prison was full to bursting with kunai, trail packs, and the bandage-like armor that was so popular with ninja. There were barrels of dried food, all ready to be packed up and taken on the road. There was also clothes, blanket, and backpacks. All of them were busy rummaging through everything and grabbing as much as they could carry. They found out that the clothes were too big for them, but each of them took a backpack with them and filled them with as much as they could. Haku ignored the kunai because he thought that they were too big and bulky and picked out a bunch of senbon, long steel needles. Even when Neji pointed out that the senbon had a lower chance of hitting an opponent, Haku shrugged and took them anyways. Most of the backpacks were taken up with food. Sadly, they weren't able to carry the blankets with them. This is great stuff, Haku said smiling as he sorted through the food. I don't think that we'll be hungry for a while. Maybe we should see if the next storeroom has money, Sai suggested. They have a lot more stuff than I thought that they would. There should be a room with scrolls on the next level. Kimimaro spoke up suddenly. I heard the man in charge of feeding me mentioning it once. Let's find a scroll about the techniques about your clan, Gaara said to him. We all have scrolls that we're using, you need one too. Then you can practice with us. Kimimaro nodded once. I'll do my best to be useful, he said. Naruto laughed. You don't have to be useful, he said grinning, you're one of us now. We learn this stuff because we want to, and because we think that one day it'll help us. After all, what kinda Hokage doesn't know any jutsu? What's a Hokage? Kimimaro asked curiously. The leader of the village that Naruto, Sasuke, Sakura, Hinata, Neji and I used to live in, Sai said. His weird smile in place. It's Naruto's dream that's very unlikely to happen. Hey, Naruto said indignantly. Shut up, Sasuke and Neji hissed. The room that Kimimaro had talked about was right next to an impressive set of double doors with grotesque pictures of battle and carnage. Naruto felt somewhat queasy just looking at it, but the voices on the other end caused him to lean forwards to listen. He had wandered off a little way away from his friends. He had volunteered for guard duty. While the library had been huge, he didn't really want to see it. Something about the dark wood and the musty smell of the candles made Naruto feel like he was being watched somehow, so while the rest looked for a scroll to help Kimimaro, Naruto watched the hall for anyone who was coming. And why shouldn't we attack soon? A loud man was shouting. We are the most powerful clan in Water Country. They would all be killed in one battle. And using the boy would assure us of victory. Another man yelled. Here, here. A coarse-sounding woman yelled. We attack tomorrow at dusk. Another man was yelling. There was more, but Naruto had scuttled away towards the library. Guys, Naruto said nervously, I think we'd better go. We're getting close. Sakura mumbled. No, I really think we need to go, Naruto pushed. You're not the boss, Neji grumbled, and we're not done yet. Guys, I think this is it, Sai said, looking at where he had thrown a bunch of books onto the floor and found a small locked cabinet. He took out a thin metal rod that he had grabbed in the last storeroom and injected it into the lock. After stirring around a little, a loud click sounded and the small door opened to reveal a scroll about the size of the ones that they were carrying. Tossed it down to Kimimaro. It's got a blood seal on it, he said, prick your finger and get some blood on the scroll. Kimimaro did as he was told, and he opened the scroll without a problem. Neji and Haku looked over his shoulder and nodded. This looks right, Neji said calmly. I wish I could find something like that, Haku sighed. All I've been doing is practicing control. Guys, we have to go. Naruto said angrily, there's a meeting going on the next room. So? Neji said angrily back, we might need some of this. These guys'll kill us, Naruto shot back, I heard them, and the meeting's almost over. You guys have trusted me up till now. Trust me on this. These guys are bad. He's right, Kimaro said, his eyes wider than usual, if my family sees you, they'll kill you. The rest looked at each other. I bet we can take them, Neji said thoughtfully. Sasuke stared at him like he was the biggest idiot he had ever seen in a long line of idiots. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Hinata, say something to your cousin. They're right, Hinata said pushing her fingers together, it was an old habit, this is a big clan, and when we fought that one guy, we got really lucky. Just because we've been practicing a bunch of jutsu and none of them have an active Kekkei Genkai doesn't mean that we'll win, we're just kids, Neji-san. Guys, Naruto was starting to hop from foot to foot, the talking stopped. Everyone dropped what they were doing and made a dash for the door, slipping out up it quickly. Sasuke left what was left of the torch that they had used in the library. The place had obviously been ransacked, but Naruto hoped that the Kaguya would worry more about the library than finding the culprit. Even then it sounded improbable. They dashed into the darkness of the hallway, and not a moment too soon. It seemed like the second that they were hidden, the door opened and people started to file out. Hurry up, Naruto whispered, everyone, grab someone else's hand. We can't lose anyone. Naruto reached out and found someone's hand, and someone else grabbed his other one. All 9 of them ran as fast as they could, stumbling all the way, towards the stairs and the trapdoor. The hallways and stairs seemed to go on forever, but finally Naruto felt someone squeeze his arm and saw a faint light. They burst from the hallway into the cool air of midnight. Neji and Sasuke grabbed the wooden door and put it in place. There was an alarm from inside the building. Hurry! Naruto yelled, throwing caution to the winds. Naruto didn't know just how long he and the others ran. When he was older, he would only remember an impression of blurring trees, snapping branches, trying to breathe while his lungs were burning, and not caring what happened as long as they managed to get away. After a while they weren't running as much as they were stumbling, and at last Naruto found himself in a pile of arms and legs and exhausted breathing. Hey! Naruto looked up wearily. He was staring at a large horse-pulled wagon with a middle-aged man looking at them in surprise. What are you kids doing out here? The man said, it's dangerous, this is Kaguya territory. You kids are lucky that one of their patrols didn't find you. Get on, I'll take you to the festival at Okino. I'm not going to let some psychotic clan find you and display your heads on pikes as a warning. Another win. The announcer yelled, number 4 is on fire. A woman who appeared to be about 20 stared at the huge number of coins as her assistant danced with glee and swung the pet pig around. Her brown eyes narrowed as she looked over at a large box filled with coins and 2 bags that were almost bursting with money. You've been winning all week. The black-haired assistant cheered, we're going to pay off all our debt. The woman didn't seem to be sharing in the joy of the occasion. On the contrary, her eyes continued to narrow and she bit her lip. This is the worst possible of omens, she muttered. Omake. The legendary gambler. Naruto clutched the bag closely to him as he approached the small group of ninja. They were a rough-looking crowd, but Naruto continued to summon his courage and went on. Hey, Gaki, one of them called, get out of here. I want to play too. Naruto yelled back, y'all got any money? One of them asked, a slight smirk on his face. Naruto held up the 2 ryu he had found, and hoped that he looked more confident than he felt. He was starting to wonder if he could still just run off and try this again another night, but secretly, he knew that if he ran away now, he wouldn't even do this again. Hey, Dato, one of them said indignantly, you're not going to let him, are you? I have a kid his age. What are you complaining about? The first one asked, it's his choice what he does with his money. You're disgusting, the third one said, I refuse to play this game. It'd be like stealing from my son. Alright, kid, y'all wanna play? The second one said with a smirk. Yeah, but I don't know how, Naruto admitted. The 2 men exchanged grins. All y'all do is bet on what you roll. It's real easy, the hardest ones to get are 7 and 11. So bet on those cause you'll win. Okay, Naruto chirped. You start, the first one said, smiling and handing Naruto a pair of dice. Okay, I bet everything on 7. Naruto said, rolling the dice. The 2 men stared at the 4 and the 3 that stared up at them. Beginner's luck, the second one said. Naruto skipped off with a very full bag of money, leaving two men staring after him with a look of shock and despair. "We got cleaned out by a 6-year-old, the first one said. "You know," the ninja who had sat out said thoughtfully, "I think I might bring my son next time. Don't even think about it. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.